Hey, Earthlings, we're alive. We're live. We're live and alive. So we've all just realised that we're completely out of practice doing this. So we've had a bit of issues with just about everything so far. So welcome along, folks. And this is an unusual time for us. So I don't know whether we're going to get a live audience even, but hopefully we will. And if not, then hopefully people will catch up on the recording of it. All the usual things still apply. That the best chat would be on the YouTube channel. And also in terms of comments, we don't charge for them. So that's remains the same, as it were. So there is that. So gang, I've got a bit of a surprise. I've done a new intro for us. Do you want to see it? The only answer to that question is yes.
Yeah, because I've not seen it yet.
No, of course you haven't. No, it's
we can't judge it at least without even seeing it.
I know. Yeah, it was. I slung it together yesterday, so it's not that good, but it's interesting. Maybe.
Very 1990s children's TV.
Yeah.
I was going to say that it's like a children's TV tune. It looks like there's bombs going off behind us. Either that, or we had a bad curry the night before.
Yeah, there was. There's a name. There's a name for that effect, but I can't remember it. But also the flash that was added in as well. So it was all high tech stuff.
Yeah.
Guys, you know. I mean, I wouldn't kind of let you down or anything.
No.
So we've got a lull anyway. So that's quite good.
All that matters.
When I used to debate in the early days of the internet, or relatively in the 1990s, often your opponent would put lull to try and take the mick. And I used to always say, "Oh, I love you lots too," just to stop them doing it, kind of thing. But lots of love, I think I said it meant. So, right. Anyway, in terms of lots of love, we've got something to listen along to. So this is an audio rather than it's not a video. So the people on the screen won't move. It's a recent thing that caught my ears, and so we thought we'd do a spontaneous watch along. I suppose you ought to call it a listen along, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
So this is a listen along. So I've probably done it wrong. So this is George Martin of Carnism Debunked, the vegetarian concept, and also Natalie Fulton, who works for, or volunteers for, I think she works for something called Pro Animal Future, which seems to be an animal welfare group that specializes in doing ballot initiatives. So it's kind of political campaigning. So they get into that a little bit. And so I picked out three sections, and the first one's the longest, and then there's two others. So Ronnie and Andy, if you want me to stop, you better just shout stop, and I will, because there's quite a lot. There's lots of different topics and everything. So you're bound to want to kind of jump in depending on the points. Now for the audience, I know it's really not easy to see, but if you look at the transcript on the right of your screen, then that'll be moving as they talk. I know it's pretty small, but that's the best I could do. Right, so are we all ready to go, lads?
Yep.
Splendid. Okay, so we're starting at 6:24. All right, so we're starting with the individual and system thing, Ronnie, that you talked about before. So
Yeah.
Let's go on that.
Avoidance I felt of talking about the individual, the consumer, and it was more about the system, the corporations, how powerful these slaughterhouses are.
Now I'm just going to pause that just to check that you both can hear that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
And people can. Jennifer's waiting with bated breath. If you can confirm also in the audience that you can hear that, that would be good.
Talk to me about the psychology of that, and or maybe you even disagree, but do you agree with me first of all? And talk to me about the psychology of that, if you do agree that you maybe spoke in that kind of way on those shows.
I definitely spoke in that kind of way. When I was there, I wasn't representing Natalie, Fulton, vegan activists. I was there representing
Right.
Pro Animal Future, which is not a vegan organization. We don't require people to be vegan to help us. We want to bring animal rights into the mainstream, and we can't do that with only 3% of the population. We're trying to win elections, and you need at least like over 50% of the vote for initiatives to pass. So if we only ran stuff that would appeal just to vegans, then we wouldn't win. Maybe we'd win in 40 years, but not right now. So what we're trying to do is create a broader appeal. And I think a really great example of this is Prop 12 in California. Do you know what that one is?
Something about egg laws, maybe? Is that it?
No, it's about cage-free eggs and banning gestation crates in.
Right, so a couple of issues there already for me, at least. First of all, it's kind of framed as animal rights, but clearly we're talking about animal welfare here. And I suppose the ballot initiatives are a little bit like you would say in England, early day motions, I suppose.
They're referendums. What it is at an election in the USA, I think it's on a state level. There are these sort of special petitions that you can kind of get members of the public to sign. And I think if you get something like 100,000 signatures, that gets put on a ballot, and it's like a referendum. And when people go to vote at the election, and the order, I don't think all of them get put on the ballot. They're kind of the top ones, the ones that gets the most signatures. They get put forward as ballot measures, and then when people go to vote, they can vote yes or no on those ballot measures in a referendum. And in fact, I think there are some states in the USA that actually banned greyhound racing, because the greyhound racing there's a greyhound racing organization, an anti-greyhound racing organization in the USA called Grey 2K USA. And I know they certainly got greyhound racing banned in Massachusetts through a ballot measure. They went out and got over 100,000 signatures, and then at the ballot, they had a majority of the voters vote in favour of banning greyhound racing. So that's something we haven't got over here. And obviously,
it would have to go to in Britain. You'd have to go to the Lords. Now,
you'd have to. It's because we don't. I mean, this is state by state.
But that's what Debbie's saying here. That when it goes to the federal level, that's when it all gets ripped back down again. So what happened to the greyhound thing?
The greyhound thing, well, that was made law in certainly Massachusetts. I think since then other states have maybe had ballot measures banning greyhound racing. And as far as I know, I'd certainly when Massachusetts was upheld and kind of went through, and so that was a situation where a ballot measure was used, for abolitionist reasons. Certainly, as far as like the exploitation, oppression of greyhounds is concerned. And I think these things have played their part. I mean, the greyhound racing industry now is very, very small in the USA compared to what it used to be. And I think that these ballot measures have played their part in that. So they kind of do have a use, but when they're used for welfareist reasons, I would question that rather than abolitionist reasons.
Yeah, but Natalie has almost hinted already that that's what you'd have to do to get the support in the first place. and then you've got to still go to fed level. I mean, it seems to me that if you've got something to do with dogs, then you've got a good chance for it not to be overridden.
Something like that, yeah. If and of course that's in terms of the total, oppression, exploitation of our fellow animals by humans. The greyhound racing is very small compared with other areas. That doesn't mean it's not a good thing that it's banned. Of course it is. But with these other things, you see, it's a question of like, to me, it's about the use of our resources. That there's so much energy of vegans being put in to these ballot measures, getting the signatures, all the campaigns surrounding it, and then that's just to bring in. That's just bringing welfareist measures. That's just to slightly improve the conditions of our fellow animals under exploitation, isn't it? And our question is that really the best? Is that really what vegans should be doing? It wouldn't be far better for all that energy to be used for vegan outreach, to educate people, to reject the fundamental wrong of the exploitation of our fellow animals, because that's the only way. It's not, what we need. What we need is we need people like us to be in charge. What you're trying to do with these things is kind of get politicians who are speciesists and human supremacists to make concessions towards our fellow animals, and just concessions in this case towards better treatment of our fellow animals. Nothing about abolishing their exploitation. And so, to me, it's not.
It's a movement issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a movement issue. We need proper system change, and that's a system where people like us, call the shots. And the only way you get that is through vegan education, because the only way you get politicians.
Yeah, but what you would support, Ronnie, surely would be if the welfarists did the welfare and the vegans did the vegan stuff, then you'd be all right with that, wouldn't you?
Well, my concern is vegans being dragged into these welfarist campaigns when people that aren't vegan aren't going to do vegan outreach, are they? It's only vegans that can do vegan outreach, and so we need.
But the question, though, Ronnie, is: will the welfarists do welfare even? And is that the reason why vegans end up doing it?
Whether they do or not isn't our concern. The concern.
No, I know.
Yeah. The concern of vegans is to educate non-vegans to become vegan, so that eventually, we change the culture, we change the politics, and we create an animal liberationist society. That's the only way to do it. That's the only way we'll get animal liberation. You're never going to get animal liberation while speciesists and human supremacists are in charge. How is that going to happen? And why the vast majority of people don't believe in animal liberation? How are you going to get it? You have to educate ordinary people. That's the fundamental. We've got to go to that fundamental level to create radical change. You've got to go to the, radical means, it means something that goes to the root. You have to go to the root of the problem, and that is the fact that so many people aren't vegan, and we have to tackle that. Otherwise, we're never going to get. You're only going to get a tiny.
I was going to say that's what you did with your hair. You went to the root of the problem.
Yeah, went to the root.
Andy,
yeah.
As you know, on TikTok, there's a lot of activity by scrap factory farming at the moment, and this seems to be one of those things. Like if the vegans just let them at it, as it were, as they say in Ireland, just let them be, then I suppose we'd be okay with that. It's a question of that they seem to want to rope vegans in, and they themselves.
We're the only ones that do any activism. That's why they want us.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. You see.
Yeah, but just to, I mean, so for me, it's the standard vegan contradiction. So we started by talking about the idea of introducing animal rights to people that already don't believe in them, but we did nothing to address the fact that they don't believe or respect in them. We just kind of got them to be more comfortable or happy with the idea of taking a cage away from hens, for example. So automatically, we've introduced this idea of animal rights, and instantly we've diluted it to that of welfare and treatment. Because the only way, as Ronnie pointed out with the greyhounds, the only way that you can get to a point where you can start bringing in legislation is that education is already there. So as he pointed out, the vast majority of people obviously didn't agree with or didn't support greyhound racing to begin with, which is why the industry was so tiny. So the education that said, hey, this probably isn't the right thing to do, or there isn't a lot of interest in this, had already happened. Whereas that's what we need to have before we start thinking about legislation on banning flesh, for example, because those things aren't comparable. The vast majority in this case are for that, are in support of that, do continue to want that and demand those products. And so without that initial education, we're going to be stuck at 3% vegans. We're not creating any more vegans, and we're just going to have a lot more comfortable consumers. So we're not even addressing the problem. If anything, we're exacerbating it, but we're doing it under the illusion of progress. And I think that's why it's so scary. It's not just the fact that vegans are doing the work of welfareists, it's that this welfareist work is actually setting back the vegan aim.
Yeah, well, that would be the case whoever did it. But at least from our point of view, if the vegans didn't do it, that's a major advance on what is happening right now. Because I mean, essentially, it's just like division of labor. You know, let the non-vegans do the non-vegan stuff, so we as vegans can, you know, carry on with it. I got a reply from someone who was defending scrap factory farming, and they're saying vegan education takes too long. And I was thinking, hang on, first of all, what doesn't?
Well, look, if we look at here in the UK. There's been decades and decades of campaigning against the various forms of oppression of our fellow animals. What have we got from government? We've got a hunting ban that is really weak. It's constantly hunts are still going out hunting. There's very little is done to enforce that law. That's full of loopholes. And secondly, we've got a ban on fur farms, but fur can still be imported into this country and sold. So that's all we got, really. I can't think of really anything else we've got.
No, I mean, without being blunt and rude, we've still got a government that thinks it's okay to drop bombs on children. So yeah, we're quite a way away from them respecting non-human rights, to be honest.
I know, and this is the thing. So to get something so much bigger, you know, passed through in legislation like scrapping factory farming. If you scrap factory farming, it means the supply of meat is going to be massively diminished, and people are going to have to massively reduce their consumption of meat, well, and other animal products, because you're not going to get so much produced. And what is produced is going to be massively more expensive.
No, and,
so,
you know, strangely enough, if that was possible somehow, from the welfare point of view, that all of the legislation that's currently in place that potentially, and I say this very loosely, but protects animals would be null and void, right? If you got rid of all these industries, then the demand would still exist, but the supply chain wouldn't be there to fill it. So people would just go and do the worst possible things to free living beings because they'd still want to consume those products. And there'd be no protection in place for them because the welfare legislation that currently exists wouldn't extend to them. So in terms of welfare, things could get much worse. It's not a solution without tackling the demand, and which is education. And you're skipping that part. Yeah, it'd be brilliant. I mean, everyone wants to say, this is really difficult. It takes too long. I wish we could just click our fingers and have it tomorrow. Of course. But skipping the education and just hoping that people are going to have like an epiphany moment and change their minds without anyone ever addressing that is, well, I'm sorry, just brainless.
And the thing about, you know, say scrapping factory farming, it's kind of an all or nothing situation. Either factory farming is scrapped or it isn't, right? Either you get legislation to scrap factory farming, you don't, and that would be a very long-term thing anyway. But with vegan education, every person you educate to become vegan, that here in the UK, that creates a reduction in demand for our fellow animals to be to be slaughtered, to either caught or farmed and then slaughtered for food. That reduces that demand by almost 100 animals a year.
Mhm.
So you've got with vegan outreach, you've got a huge long-term gain of totally changing the system of bringing about animal liberation. But you've got this short-term gain of all these animals that are being spared by people no longer demanding that they be exploited and killed.
Absolutely. And the other really crucial part about that is you're not just getting people that oppose one form of animal use. You're not just getting people that are looking at this and saying, hey, using animals for food is wrong, but I'm still going to wear them. I'm still going to use products that are tested on them. I'm still going to support the zoo or the safari park. Whereas if, you create a vegan, it's not just a demand for food that goes away. It's a demand for all animal use. And the education, when they explain that to other people, that's completely different than just I'm against factory farming.
Well, I guess we should move on. I see that George is getting a lot of love already. But Terry, you will be pleased to know that in this audio, he kind of loses just about every point that he makes to Natalie, which is pretty interesting. What you said, Ronnie, the biggest cheer at NARD in Dublin was when they announced as a victory that the Irish, there's a move now in Ireland to ban hunting, which was a bit disappointing for me because, like you say, the English, Scottish, and Welsh hunts are still hunting. Well, they've already had a ban in Ireland of the only deer hunt, right? The Ward Union. And they're still hunting. So there's evidence already in Ireland that it doesn't work.
It depends on the terms of the legislation. A law could be passed. That what they need to do is pass a law that will completely shut the hunts down. They have to shut down. They have to close their kennels.
And it's got to be enforced, Ronnie.
And that has to be enforced. Yeah. That's the only way. You could get rid of hunting through
legislation. But the English cops said right at the start that they wouldn't enforce it.
Well, they won't enforce it. I mean, they'd have to enforce it if the government, that was the will of the governments, because that would be the instructions to the police. Then they'd have to. But it's not, because the trouble is when you've got speciesists in charge of the system, in charge of the government, they're not going to give any priority to things like that. They're not going to give, priority to enforcing the Hunting Act. Of course not.
Even the mechanics is interesting because one of the things that the police said was that if we kind of swamp the place using loads and loads of officers, because it would, I mean, you'd have to have a couple of hundred officers probably, but then you stop the hunt and everybody gets off the horses and you arrest all the people in the field and the hunt master and all the rest of it, and the huntsman whippers in, and then you've got 80 horses.
Yeah, I think you could have legislation that kind of cut all that out. If you had legislation that actually caused the hunts to disband, in other words, they just couldn't operate at all, and so you destroyed the infrastructure of hunting. So there were no more hunt kennels, there were no more hunt stables, or anything like that. You got rid of that, they wouldn't be going out in the field in the first place.
Well, then what you've got is the problem that you raised a few minutes ago, which is the fact that that kind of legislation is really only going to be brought in by a non-speciesist parliament, which is why in a speciesist parliament you end up with laws about our fellow animals which are full of loopholes and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, and which is why the main focus for all vegans should be vegan outreach. It's got to be. That's the only way we get the type of change and create the sort of society we want.
Yeah, and the only other point I'd make about, you mentioned the hunt ban in Britain. Obviously, all the people used to, the fur ban, all the people who used to run the fur farms are now multimillionaires, including our mate Michael Cobbledick.
So a lot of them have gone to other countries where fur farming is still lawful, and they carried on doing the fur farming. But
Cobbledick went to Europe, and then there was a ban there, as far as I know. So he got compensation twice.
Yes, Oh yeah, and then what are those people spending that compensation on? They're certainly not spending it on anything.
Well, I mean, when it comes to Cobbledick, we can trace it. So he spent his first amount of compensation setting up in, I can't remember if it was Sweden or Holland, and then he sent his second bout of compensation setting up in China. So all it ever did was increase him to expand his market.
It moves the problem. You see, this is the thing that people claim victories when in fact all that's happened is that the problem's been moved around. That it hasn't. There's been no gain for our fellow animals. There's been no reduction in the exploitation and oppression of our fellow animals. It's just been moved around.
And I mean, going back to the welfare argument of that, obviously we've got, as it's always told to me, some of the best animal welfare legislation in the world in the UK. Well, obviously when we banned fur here and it moved to the Netherlands, that was, I'm assuming, inferior. And then obviously when they banned it and it got moved to China, that was absolutely inferior. And so the welfare of these animals that are now bred in these fur farms is 100% worse than it once was. It's just that the problem's been moved out of sight.
Yeah. I mean, I think there seems to be a reduction in fur wearing here in the.
Would you say a huge part of that though is to do with the fact that there's so many good quality alternatives now? Also,
I think partially, but also there aren't the places people can buy the fur from. You know, the fur retail industry in the UK was decimated. It wasn't decimated by the government; it was decimated by the animal liberation fronts, by direct action. It wasn't decimated. There was no law to ban the sale of fur. There still isn't a law to ban the sale of fur. The reason why you don't get, there used to be fur shops everywhere, and loads of department stores had fur departments. And now the only place where you get high street fur shops is, in London, and in a certain part of London you've got them, and Harrods is the only department store in the UK that has a fur department. That was done through direct action. It's not, government had no input into that at all. And then I think there were campaigns going on at the same time, educating people about what was involved in the rearing and catching of our fellow animals for fur, and so that maybe deterred people from wearing fur. But then, of course, you've got to weigh that up against the question: how many of those people bought leather goods instead of fur goods? Is that so?
Mm-hmm.
It's an uncertain. So I think it can be said, overall that campaign did benefit our fellow animals, forcing these places out of business. But anyone who wants fur can still get it. It's just harder.
Yeah, but that's a demand oversupply thing again, isn't it? Listen, lads, we better move on because we talked for about 20 minutes and we only played about 2 minutes of the thing, I think. So again, don't forget, if you want me to stop, shout out and I will. And also for the people who've joined in the audience, the transcript there. I know it's very small, but it does kind of read out what they're saying to help, because this is audio only. Okay.
Pork production.
Yeah.
So huge ballot measure. And if you looked at the time, what percentage of consumers are buying cage-free eggs over caged eggs? It was a very, very small percentage. I don't remember the exact number, but it was less than 10%. So their consumption was showing that they didn't want cage-free eggs. But then when they got to the ballot box and they voted, over 60% of people voted to ban caged egg production. So we're able to get a much broader network of public support by shifting out of the consumer frame. So that's why I was specifically not talking about it.
Okay, so this obviously throws up many questions. So if there's the case that there's this misalignment with what the public says and what the public actually does, why focus on the system when we should focus on them? Because you would agree that's hypocrisy, right? Like, so the public are saying, yeah, we should totally ban factory farms. Oh my God, yeah, caged eggs, oh, disgusting. Yeah, ban them. And then they go to the shop and they just buy that crap. So why wouldn't you focus on them if that is what if that's the kind of hypocrisy that's happening around
just
us?
very quickly, I mean,
Sure.
It's a false equivalence. That's the problem with it. So, I mean, for example, if the vote said, well, do you think cage-free eggs are better? And don't forget, they cost more money. People would think differently about their vote. But when you're comparing what they do in the supermarket to what they do in the ballot box, one of them gives them information saying, hey, this is a cruel practice versus a not so cruel practice. Which one are you going to pick? In the supermarket, it's like this one's $1, this one's $2. Which one are you going to pick? It's a false equivalence to put it in those terms. I don't want to defend the speciesist, but that's not data that we can go, yeah, this definitely means something. Price dictates loads of stuff. Look at how much of a big deal recently Trump's made about the price of eggs being reduced. It's got nothing to do with where they're used or how they're used or how they're treated. It's got everything to do with what you're paying. That's what dictates many people's decisions.
Yeah, they were promoting backyard eggs, weren't they, to get around the problem in the USA at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go.
Sure. So I think if we did try to focus on them, I'm not sure what the population of California is. I know it's like a fifth of people in the US, so pretty high. If we were to try to convince all of those individual consumers to buy the cage-free eggs, that would take way more time and capacity than the animal rights movement has. Whereas if we run ballot initiatives, we can get the same results faster in a way that the public actually does support. And then we get media attention. We kind of push the issue into the political landscape, that's where we see real change in society anyway. So I think there's a few reasons, but the number one would just be it's completely impractical to try to change everyone when you can just run a measure and have the benefit quicker.
Yeah, I mean, without being rude, it sounds very much like James Aspie's old tactic of, I could work really hard to make myself a living, or I could do like a bait and switch and trick everyone. Yeah, the problem with that is people will find out and then they'll be annoyed that you've bait and switched them because you haven't made them realize that what they're doing is wrong. You've just used some semantics to get them to do what you want. There's no education that's come there, which is still the part that's missing. It's just a bait and switch. And so eventually they'll realize, like when the price changes, for example, that maybe that wasn't the best thing to vote for. And we've seen this before. There's people that talk about these cases where they've asked the question of, are you in support of this particular slaughterhouse in your town? And they go, no, of course not. Horrible place. But you know that if it gets shut down, you'll all have to pay more for your flesh. Oh, hang on, then we better keep it. So what people think and what they demand aren't always the same. And we need to take that into consideration because it's education that changes how they think.
Yeah, there are campaigns at the moment, aren't there, in Britain to object to planning permission and stuff. But it's a kind of NIMBY thing, isn't it? Not in my backyard, but they're not opposed to the product that comes out of these places. They oppose to the fact that it's near them.
And what you get is you get organisations jumping on this. There was a campaign like that against a proposed factory farm, where the campaigners won. And don't forget that on a planning application, you can't object on sort of moral grounds. The objection has to be on things like kind of traffic noise and on pollution and on the amount of traffic, road capacity and all those things. Those are the sort of valid planning objections. You can't object and saying, there's going to be horrendous suffering to the animals in these places. That's not a valid objection to a planning application.
Well, you said that the campaign won. What did they win?
The campaign won. Well, they obviously won on those. The planning committee obviously accepted that there was going to be.
Well, from an animal rights point of view, it
wouldn't have been won from any animal rights point of view, or even on an animal welfare point of view. It won on how much disturbance there would be to the local population of humans.
Oh, okay, surely, Ronnie, no vegan is going to get involved with that kind of campaign. Surely.
Yeah, but they do. I mean,
Why?
Animal Rising, who don't promote veganism, but I presume that people involved in running Animal Rising are themselves vegan. they sort of claimed it as a victory. They claimed that somehow they were involved in it. Isn't it brilliant? We've stopped this plan application, or we've been part of the campaign and send us donations. We've stopped this place.
Yeah, I'm talking about the individual activists. Why would they get involved with that?
Because they don't see they don't see the bigger picture of what the actual situation is. That actually stopping a planning application factory farm spares none of our fellow animals. If the demand for those products, I think it was a pig farm. So if the demand for pig meat, if demand for bacon and pork and stuff like that remains the same, then the same number of animals are going to be.
I get the argument, but what vegan doesn't understand that?
Well, they don't. Well, because I think the problem we've got is that this is a problem, I think, throughout humanity, that humans have in general, that they don't think deeply enough about things. They don't look into things enough. And they see, isn't it great? There was going to be this horrible place that was going to be built where all these animals were going to be imprisoned, and it was going to be awful, and we've stopped it being built. Isn't that wonderful? They don't think, but hang on a minute, what is the real situation? Does that really make any difference? If you see what I mean, when what's going to happen is,
I thought arguably it could make it could be worse for the hens.
I was about to say,
or whatever. Well, it depends on that.
There is actually an argument that cage-free is worse in terms of the amount of hens per whatever you want to describe it as square foot, because obviously once upon a time the cages took up a percentage of that space that you couldn't fill with chickens because there would have been a bar there. Whereas now they're saying without the cages, they push more chickens into the same area. So there is an argument that actually the welfare is decreased, not improved. It's just the illusion of an improvement.
And you're still going to get all the other things.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this particular the particular facility I was talking about was I think it was a pig farm, but the same applies to you get many different
and these are going to be brand new facilities, brand new.
They're going to be brand new facilities, and I would think that what would happen is that some other factory farms or other facilities would close, and the animals
so again from a welfare point of view, not that we care, but from a welfare point of view, you'd want the new
the new one is going to be better, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. New standards, new everything, better hygiene facilities, better access, better fire safety, everything that they'd want.
But you see it's so that because the short-sightedness, people have this desire for victories. Oh, this is a great victory. When you look into it, it's not a victory at all. What is a victory is every person who becomes vegan is a victory. That's the true victory. That's how we need to assess our victories. And no, it's not easy. It's not easy to assess how many people you've persuaded to become vegan. You don't get a lot of feedback. That's the only real victory.
That works for us though, Ronnie, as individuals. But the problem is if you're a group saying, hey, we turned 20 people vegan today, doesn't pay your staff. It doesn't mean that this is the problem. So that's where the victories come in. Yeah,
a big part of this is fundraising. That all these supposed victories that aren't victories are always accompanied by a plea for funds. Send us money. In celebration of this great victory, and so that we can achieve more victories like this that aren't really victories, by the way. But I mean, do they? There's two ways to look at that. Do they really know they're not really victories, but they've been totally cynical in using these things to get money out of people? Or are they generally deceiving themselves that they're achieving victories that aren't victories? Which is it? I like to think it's the second. I'd like to think that.
I was going to say my optimism wants to say the second, but sadly my experience is there's no way they don't know. Yeah.
Well, you're separating out there the kind of the leadership from the rank and file.
Yeah, I think that's important to state that we are talking about sort of like
the leadership. There's a rank and file. People just follow on because people don't think about things enough. Oh, join this campaign. Let's get this place stopped.
It's the rank
Well,
and
let's
file
get
that
this-
worries me.
Let's get this supermarket to stop buying products from a particular place, while forgetting that if they stop buying products from a particular place, they just buy products from somewhere else that's just as bad. And so it makes no difference to our fellow animals in his campaign.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Andy said that it's it's for the group rather than the people, but there is some research that people do drop out of campaigning groups because of disillusionment with the slowness of it all. So in that sense, those are the kind of people who benefit from the victories because it kind of keeps them campaigning. Now, so there's a terrible kind of balancing to be done then. Is it better for them to stay involved with all this welfare stuff that's not going to do much rather than just leaving because as you say,
I think it's just got a bit. All we can do is emphasize and say what we're saying here. All we can do is emphasize what the real victories are. That the real victory is when you educate somebody to become vegan, right? There's not a lot of feedback on that, but we all know, all of us who became vegan, everyone listening to this who became vegan, whether they're listening live, they're listening to recording, and everyone who in the world who's become vegan has done so because they received information of some sort about veganism, and sometimes more than one type of information, whether that's a leaflet, whether they've seen a poster, whether they've seen a video, an advert, a post on social media, maybe had a discussion with someone. They've all been in receipt of information. So
yeah, but Ronnie, you're missing out on the sociology here. We're social animals. Now, you've complained, we all three have complained, that the majority of vegans are not active. So essentially, their activism is sending donations to groups. Now, if those groups can't come back to them and say, "Oh, well, this is what we've done with your money,"
well,
but they could. This is the real key point. The groups seem to think, and I mean, it is a cycle now that does exist, but the groups seem to think that people won't donate to them unless they say, "Hey, look, we played a 0.1% part in this particular protest. Give us some money." Whereas I, at the very least, and the people that I associate with, would have far more respect for these groups and be far more willing to contribute to them if they said, "We put on this outreach event today, we turned 50 people vegan, or we helped educate this school." That's the kind of thing that I'd want to see them doing, because that's them saying, "Hey, these victories are important, and these 50 people that we've educated, they're going to go and do their own outreach, and they're going to create 50 more." Whereas them sort of like jumping on the back of some scheme that's not going to change anything from anything is very sleazy. So I think there's just this misconception that people won't donate to them because of the lack of victories, when actually people would have a lot more respect for them if they were doing the things that these people can't do.
Yeah, I mean, this comment that outreach is slow. Yeah, there is no fast way to achieve animal liberation. There is no fast way. There is no short road. There's a long road, or there's a long road, or there's a wrong road. In other words, there's a long road, which is the right road, or there's all these wrong roads that end in just come to a dead end. That's the problem. There is, how if you're trying to campaign through, putting pressure on politicians who are deeply speciesist to make concessions. How long a road is that? That's a road that goes on forever, isn't it? Unless you change the basic mindset of those people.
you could have a new T-shirt, Ronnie.
There is no quick fix. There's either one that works in the long term. But the thing, as I've said before about vegan education, is you do get a short-term benefit of a reduction in demand for our fellow animals to be exploited and killed. That's where you get the short-term benefit from it. So it has a short-term benefit, and it has this long-term benefit of bringing about animal liberation.
I think you need a new T-shirt, Ronnie. I'm on the long road, but at least I'm not on the wrong road.
It'd have to be quite small letters, wouldn't it? Especially on my chest.
Right. Okay. Shall we move on, do you think?
Yeah.
Don't sound too enthusiastic, Andy.
We've only done about 3 minutes of the actual show so far, and 45.
I know we might have to. I don't know. We might have to jump this bit. I'll while it's playing, I'll read my notes and see if there's anything we can jump, because you're right. This is going to be 3 hours long if we're not careful.
You're someone who's taken on individual change yourself as a vegan. So do you still? So you obviously do know the importance of that. So do you still do activism that is based on changing the individual? Because that's, I mean, both you and I are vegan. We're not doing this hypocritical stuff that people are doing. We're not funding animal agriculture at all. So never mind cage free, never mind gestation crate free. You and I are vegans. We don't fund any kind of animal abuse. So, is there still room in your life at the moment for that individual change activism, or are you still just focused fully on system change stuff?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times when people hear that I mostly focus on system change, they're like, oh, well, why don't you care about individuals anymore? And that's certainly not what I'm saying. I still do street outreach sometimes. It's not a priority for me right now, but I'll still do it like with different organizations. And I find value in it, especially because I think one of the biggest benefits of street outreach isn't the chance that the person you're talking to is going to go vegan, because I think that's a very low chance, but it's making you a better advocate. You're able to deal with people being mean to you. You're able to speak well about animal rights. And then when you do,
could I interrupt for a second?
I was going to say I disagree with that too.
System change. This is
You can't interrupt for a second ever.
I can interrupt for like several minutes. He isn't talking about system change. How is what Natalie's doing changing the system? It's not changing the system. It's not changing the system. What it's doing is trying to put pressure on an existing system to make concessions. It's not changing the system. It's not changing the mindset of politicians. It's not changing the mindset of governments, of administrations. It's not changing the system. The only way we change the system is to create a situation where we're in charge, where vegans are in charge, where we run the show. That's system change. And the only way you do that is by creating more vegans.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely.
All right, is that your minute over?
Yeah, or whatever, how long it was.
Right. Actually, there's something really good coming. I don't know how long it takes to get to it, but there's something really important, which is this this weird thing that the people, and it feeds back to what Andy said. The people who say, well, look, I'm against the cruelty and all this kind of stuff, and I'm against animal slaughter. That there's a bit where it says a lot of people are against slaughterhouses, but they're not against eating animal flesh. And it turns out that it's because they have got no idea that those two things are linked. Now, that seems impossible to us, right, as vegans, but that's going to come up. So let's look at that.
To those bigger stages, you're a lot more prepared, right? Like if I had gone on those radio interviews without having talked to people about veganism, I would have been terrible. So I think it's great for us to sharpen our skills and making videos where we can reach people with that messaging. Maybe the person you're talking to won't go vegan, but someone who watches the video will. All of that stuff is definitely valuable. But we could also get into subsidies and how in the US, it's not like, I don't want to be like, quitting dairy doesn't make a difference, because I think everything does signal market demand. And the point of being vegan, in my mind, is to change culture and to show people around you that what we're doing to animals is completely unacceptable. But the average dairy farm in the US gets 73% of their revenue from the government anyway. So by opting out of that system, it's still not really having a huge impact.
Now this is Cranky Vegan's argument that even if there was a big boycott, they would still be propped up by the government. But that can't actually be true, and not for the long term.
No,
if there was a business which the government was propping up and they just couldn't sell their stuff, they couldn't just keep doing it.
Yeah, have you been following any of the farms that have had their contracts not fulfilled by Muller recently, Roger?
No.
It's funny because if any of that was true, all of these farmers, instead of like going out of their wits' mind and panicking about how they're going to pay their bills, would just sit back and count their government money.
Okay, yeah.
It's nonsense.
There is a correlation between supply and demand. If nobody consumed animal products from the exploitation of our fellow animals, there would be no animal farming, there would be no fishing industry, would there? So so between the situation now and that situation, there has to be a system of reduction.
Now, the argument is that they would still be there. It's just that it's not the consumer that would pay; it's the government that would pay.
So the government would pay for all these animals to be reared and
that's the argument.
It's bananas. I mean, what's more realistic is that the government are going to say, right, we already put in X amount of subsidies into the dairy industry, for example. So if you change the demand to plant-based milk, just for example, they can still subsidize the milk industry, but they won't be hemorrhaging anywhere near as much money because obviously you don't need to rear millions of animals anymore. And because, I mean, obviously the government, we still want them in the future to still help out with these things. We don't just expect farmers to have no support because they're growing plants instead of rearing animals. Those subsidies should still exist in a system if people depend on them to help them. It's just that they get subsidized for doing something differently. And the only way that farmers are going to actually start growing plants to create milk rather than dairy cows is the demand change. Is we say we don't want bovine formula, we want almond milk or we want oat milk. And so the farms adapt and the governments will just subsidize the industry that's there. I'm not sure why they're trying to take that away.
But the other thing is that the effect of the subsidies, what the effect of the subsidies is to reduce the price of these products. The subsidies don't mean that more animals are, the subsidies aren't paying for more of our fellow animals to be farmed. What they're doing is creating a reduction of the price of those products.
Correct, yeah.
And so the reduction in the price can lead to increasing consumption because people are more easily able to buy those products and buy more of those products. That's how the subsidies work. But if you educate somebody to become vegan, they're not going to buy animal products no matter how cheap those products are, no matter how inexpensive, they're still not going to buy them. So the answer is still vegan education.
It's always the answer. We know that.
Yeah, I know. It's just that a lot of other people don't, and that's why we keep having to bang on about it.
Yeah. Are you bored, Ronnie?
No, I'm still here.
I spent quite a long time researching and looking into like the UK subsidy system, and it's something we should probably, know a little bit about. But until we can switch what the public are demanding, it's absolutely fruitless trying to change where the government spend their money.
Well, you could do a bit of both, though, Andy. Like it would be useful. I mean, that's the only political campaign that I think would be quite useful to research the subsidy system and look at the idea of subsidy switching in order to help the farmer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how feasible it would be, but one of the things that they could look at doing, like phasing it in slowly, would be some sort of insurance payment first. So that, just for example, you've got a dairy farm that suffers some sort of loss. When they claim on the insurance, it's like, well, look, we're more than happy to help you. However, what we're going to do is help you transition to grow plants because we've looked at the long-term efficiency of dairy and it's not going to pay out. So even if they did it on a purely financial basis, those are ways that they could start transitioning some of this stuff.
The government could, if you've got an animal farm, the government could buy all the equipment from it and then give you some money to get the new stuff that you need for the plant production, let's call it. And then the government then would dispose of the old equipment by, scrapping it, reusing it or something. So that couldn't really be done by individual farmers. You'd have to have help because society will be helping the farmers transform when as they're moving plant-based too, right? So that's how it works. Get bound to, isn't it? Right, should we go on?
Yeah.
Stop doing that, Andy. Yeah.
Sorry, I just didn't want to say nothing.
Yeah. Look out, folks. There's more George Martin coming up.
I mean,
on the supply and demand side. So I think arguing with the supply and demand side of veganism is fairly easy to do just because of these subsidies. So that's why I come at it more from a cultural anti-exploitation lens.
Yeah, it kind of it is kind of doomer in a way to think about the fact that it's not fully just supply and demand. Like me and you going vegan alone doesn't completely 100% cut everything out, because you and I still have to pay tax. And there are huge subsidies involved with these corporations. So is that part of them, what you're saying is that attacking subsidies might be one of the main ways in which we see the downfall of animal agriculture?
I think it's certainly promising. I don't really know too many people working on that specifically, but I would love to see more of it. We have talked about running some sort of initiatives where we could attack subsidies more directly. Yeah, I think it would be great. In the US, only 4% of food subsidies go toward plant foods for human consumption. That's absolutely insane. Like, we know these are the healthiest foods. We know that they require much less land and water, and we're squandering billions of dollars on this highly inefficient food system. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I do think attacking that would have huge benefits. And kind of going back to the consumer thing, when people behave as
I don't want to
consumers, they
interrupt
really
again,
are
sorry.
often looking for the best deal. Price has an
But again, yeah, I was going to say, again, you're completely ignoring the fundamental issue here. Like, you want to change things without looking at the education part of it. Like, people are demanding these products. Do you think that some of the people that they've got that do the data or the analytics at US's government or the UK's government, for example, the people that are working out our budgets, you think they can't look at this system and go, hang on a minute, this isn't very efficient? They know. It's been like this for as long as many of them have been alive. The problem is their demand outweighs the fact that it's inefficient, and always has. And so until we address the fact that we're doing something wrong and that needs to change, they're going to keep doing the inefficient thing because that's what they've always done. They don't see that. It's not like someone's just going to have an epiphany moment tomorrow and go, actually, we'd save a fortune if we just ate the plants. They know this information. They've been paying the bills forever. They don't care because they want the products that they provide. And so we need to address that part. Again, you're just working on this like ignorance of though people don't have speciesist culture, cultural speciesism that we have to unlock. That's the part that seems to be forgotten in all of these conversations. Like, if only it was that simple. Like, nobody is under the illusion that this is an efficient system. Nobody that's part of it. Even the farmers that you speak to know that most of the time they're working at a loss. They're not dumb. These people are well aware of this, but the demand outweighs that. And until we change that and educate people, the demand will continue to outweigh efficiency because common sense does not prevail.
In what arena does it?
Exactly. So, like, why are we expecting that to all of a sudden people to go, oh yeah, we're hemorrhaging loads of money and we're using loads of land and resources. It'd be much easier if we were all plant-based. Yeah, they know that information. They've always known that information. They purposely don't care because they're speciesist, and you're not addressing that.
And they're also social animals as well.
Yeah.
John here is bringing up something that's coming up later, actually, which is George Martin describes himself as a centrist. I would suggest he's much more right-wing than that, and in fact he says a lot of right-wing things later in the thing, but that would be a problem. I mean, you've talked about this, Ronnie. You know, what if you've got a BNP, that's British National Party, or you know what if you've got I mean, now I suppose it's going to be people to the right of Farage, or people like Farage, right? If they get involved with vegan education, what are they going to say to people? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, to what extent that would be a problem, I don't know. I mean, I would say most people involved in vegan education are kind of left-leaning, really. And if you look at the policies of political parties relating to our fellow animals, it tends to be that the more left-wing parties have better policies. And certainly here in the UK, the Green Party is probably the most left-wing party in Parliament. They've got by far the best policies relating to our fellow animals than the other parties. Then you look at Reform UK, they want to fully legalise hunting again, and their sort of policies of climate change denial and want to roll back measures to combat the climate crisis. That's going to result in the deaths and suffering of untold numbers of our fellow animals. So it does seem to work kind of on a political spectrum like that.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. That is the right way to pronounce it. It's farage, not farage.
Farage, I think.
No, you're supposed to say farage. Like you say garage, you don't say garage. So,
well, some people, he'd probably say garage, wouldn't he?
I don't know what he'd say, but it's farage anyway.
Depends who he was trying to smooth up to.
So it would, yeah. Depends how working class is pretending to be at any given time.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Let's move on.
Outsized impact on consumer behavior. So if we can change the prices of things, then that'll have a bigger effect.
Do you think that the consumer, the average non-vegan, is bullshitting when they get polled about this stuff?
Yeah, so this is the bit that I was talking about before. This is really interesting, this bit. Martin gets the study wrong and gets corrected by Natalie, but the actual points being made are really interesting.
On the streets, and they say, do you support a ban on this, or do you support, because let me give you an example. Humane Hancock, you know who that is?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
He often cites this study that I think was done in the UK, which is that the overwhelming majority of the public or something supports a ban on slaughterhouses. Now, do you just think they're saying that to virtue signal while they're being asked the poll? Because let's think about it. If the UK government was to ban slaughterhouses tomorrow and their precious bacon is no longer on the shelves, I reckon there'd be riots across the UK. I don't know if, or are you of the more kind of less cynical mindset than me, and you think, actually, no, probably the reason people are buying bacon and eggs and stuff is because it's there, because the system just allows it. And if the government did take it away, maybe they would just be like, yeah.
Sure. So the study that he's talking about actually comes from the US, and I believe it was originally done by an animal rights group. I think it was Sentient Institute, and they got those numbers. It was actually, I don't think it was 50% for slaughterhouse. It was 47% would vote to ban slaughterhouses. And then the meat industry saw that study and they said, that's absolutely insane. We're going to replicate it. So they did it at some big ag school in the US, and they got the same results. And they were like, what is going on? So that was actually our first campaign in Denver last year, was to ban slaughterhouses, because we wanted to test that study to see if these results had any validity or if people were just bullshitting, like you said. And we found that when we ran a slaughterhouse ban, 35% of people voted to ban slaughterhouses, which is way higher than you would expect, considering there's only 3% are vegan or vegetarian. So we do increase our public support a lot by banning slaughterhouses compared to trying to get people to go vegan. But it's certainly, I mean, I think you're right that there would be riots in the street. And once people, like, a lot of people don't even think that meat has to come from slaughterhouses. Like, they just don't even know where it comes from. But when you explain to them that without slaughterhouses, meat could not exist, then that public support does go down quite a lot.
Are you saying there's a significant number of people who don't realize that animals have to be slaughtered?
Maybe they know animals have to be slaughtered, but they don't think that they're slaughtered in slaughterhouses. They think the farmer sings the animals to sleep or something. Like, they just have no idea. And I was talking to a bunch of voters in Denver during the slaughterhouse ban. And yeah, legitimately, they did not know that every animal has to go through a slaughterhouse, especially an industrial slaughterhouse, which is what.
So, lads, what do you make of that? I mean, to vegan ears, that sounds absolutely weird, right? I mean, what do you make? I mean, like the idea that they don't like slaughterhouses, and they don't know that their flesh comes from slaughterhouses. I mean, it's almost beggars belief, doesn't it?
I think
No.
it may be that there are some people that do think the animals. It's obvious that the animals have to be killed, otherwise they're not going to get their lump of meat, are they? But I think it may well be true that some of them think they're perhaps killed by other means than a slaughterhouse, which is kind of nicer and
Well,
gentler
have you
somehow.
never got on the street people saying, "Oh, they're just put down," like at the vets?
No,
I-
I've never. No, I don't think I ever had that.
I get that
Well,
sometimes. I think the
Yeah.
key part is that most people, until you ask them that question, have never thought about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true.
It's not necessarily that they have an idea either way. It's that who's asking them. What when they go to the pub with their friends, they all go, "Oh yeah, you're a big fan of the slaughterhouse, are you?" No one's having this conversation ever at any point, and so they don't think about it until you pop up.
Yeah, it goes back to your point, Andy, that you made about you get false results from these polls because they don't have enough information to even answer the questions.
Yeah, I also wanted to just quickly, Ronnie, sorry. I just wanted to address also one of the things you said, that I thought it'd be much quicker going this route because 35% of people are already against slaughterhouses, and that's quicker than turning them vegan. Yeah, those two things, again, are a false equivalence. There's a huge difference between turning someone vegan and the things that they're going to oppose and the kind of refusals that they're going to put forward versus someone that says, I don't agree with slaughterhouses. It's almost like, is there any wonder why the general public have no idea what this movement stands for or what veganism means? Because we keep telling them that it's basically the opposite of meat consumption. That's the information that the vegans are putting out. So this is a problem. Like, there's a huge difference between those things. You should be saying, there's nothing here. There's nothing that I'm comparing between these. But you're saying, I find it quicker to get people to vote and say that there are 35% of them are against slaughterhouses than getting them to go vegan. Those two things are not in the same bracket and should never be considered in the same bracket, because all we're doing otherwise is encouraging the idea that that's what veganism is. It's the opposite of flesh consumption. No, that's vegetarianism. And these distinctions need to be made by the vegans, because going back to the point that Ronnie made earlier, who's doing vegan activism if it's not vegans? Right, well, who's correcting this language if it's not vegans? So I expect better from vegans, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, we're the people that are going to be responsible for changing our claims making or for changing what people think when they hear the word vegan, and we don't do a very good job of that.
And even just on the issue of banning slaughterhouses, it's all right to do a survey and you get 35% of people saying they're opposed to slaughterhouses, or even a higher number than that. But if once that comes to the process of that being put into law, you're going to get the meat industry and the slaughterhouse industry saying, well, look, hang on a minute, if we don't have slaughterhouses, you're not going to be able to have your meat, and that's going to change, and that's going to radically change people's views on it, isn't it? And so that's never going to get through while people still want to consume animal products, is it?
No, indeed. There's a good little conversation between Colleen and Deb here. I've had non-vegan assistant that they go to sleep and don't wake up, and Deb says willful ignorance. Now, I covered that in one of my lectures, my sociology lecture, because you remember that US politician years and years ago now, who was talking about the known knowns and the known unknowns and the unknown knowns and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people laughed at that, but it turns out that if you analyze what he said, a lot of it is true. So there is ways in society of people not knowing stuff that they know. So, what they actually know becomes unknown.
Yeah, and I mean, you've raised this point a number of times, Roger, but it's absolutely true in the sense that people are not honest. If we walked around now and asked everybody, say we went to a busy football stadium, 60,000 people, and we asked every single person individually, are you racist? How many of them are going to go, yes? How many of them will be honest enough to answer that question and say, yes, I'm a racist? Versus if we did a little bit of maybe spying on them or investigating on them, how many of them have said racist things or think racist things versus how many would answer that question honestly. There's so many variables here that aren't being taken into consideration. People will say what they need to say when you put them on the spot. The amount of people that I've had conversations with in the street that go, I think it's terrible what they do. And they literally walk away from me and walk into KFC, where they already know, even in their own confused mind, that that's definitely a place that doesn't treat animals well. Even if they think the steakhouse is doing a better job, they know KFC aren't, and they're still going there.
You'd have to look for their swastika tattoos, Andy, or the fact that they're driving a swastika.
But yeah, even that. Say that they've got every knuckle's got a swastika on it. Are you a Schnazi? No. What do you do? Yeah, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. You're relying on them to be honest, and we know that most people are not. We also know socially that more people are less likely to be honest when they feel uncomfortable or pressured, or that society might judge them for their answer. And so these variables have to be considered, and they're not even thought about.
Yeah, listen, Terry, he had MS-15 tattooed on his knuckles. Right, okay, I suppose we better move on. Wrong one. Here we go.
What we were trying to shut down.
So what do they think happens? Did you manage to pull it out of them?
Not really. I mean, I think a lot of them think that the meat industry uses euthanasia or some sort of painless method. You know, when people talk about halal, they're like, oh, the animal doesn't feel pain. So I think the issue isn't that they think something different is happening. It's that they don't think about it at all.
Yeah. So this bit is really interesting because it shows that apparently attitudes about halal in Britain and the US are opposite each other. So this is what they talk about now. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Is that the reputation with halal in the States, or is that just among Muslims? Because I hear Muslims romanticize halal a lot in the UK, but the UK public in general, the non-Muslim public, they really hate halal and they think it's like, I mean, it is awful, but they say it's so much more awful than like the gas chambers and all the stuff that they fund with like the pig industry and stuff like that. There's this real kind of hatred for halal in the UK, unless you're talking to a Muslim on street outreach. And just like anyone else, they have this kind of delusional take that, like you say, the way they do it, the animal feels nothing and it's humane or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's completely different in the US, maybe because we have fewer Muslim immigrants. So it's just not an issue that's top of mind for us. The slaughterhouse we were trying to shut down was a halal slaughterhouse. So we were constantly hit with, oh, it's halal from non-Muslims, of course. And we were like, well, we have video evidence of them violating halal protocol. Isn't that bad? And they just don't even care. So yes, people do think halal slaughter is much better here in the US.
That's crazy. So in the UK, what the common thing is, if vegans protest outside a slaughterhouse, say a pig slaughterhouse or something, you get a bunch of people say, why don't you lot protest the halal slaughterhouses instead, where the animals really suffer and stuff? So it's like the other way around.
Yeah, and here, if we protest the halal slaughterhouses, then we're racist. So, you know, there's also that.
It's one of those catch-22 things. That's the racist thing. That's a nice segue, actually, to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about.
I noticed he didn't address the internalized racism, which is precisely why people answer that question the way they do.
He jumped all over that, didn't he? Terry in the comments was right about that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the only reason that anybody will bring up that they think halal is worse than any other slaughterhouse is because they've got internalized racism that they haven't addressed. It's nothing to do with how the animals are treated. It's everything to do with the fact that brown people work there and you don't like that.
Well, it's usually to do with stunning, though, Andy, to be fair. Or the lack of it, right?
Right. But how does it change anything from the victim's perspective?
Well, it's just that, you know, animal welfare ideology is based on, well, you know, they're asleep when they're cut, so they don't feel anything. Whereas in halal, they're not. And so that,
also obviously a huge part of the halal is the religious connotation where they genuinely believe that prayer that comes
it's a complicated issue, but this
delivers exactly the same relief that the stunning process was. So like swings and roundabouts, it's just based on ignorance essentially.
Yeah, but you remember Earthling Ed getting involved with stunning debates, right?
Yeah.
As though, oh, that's okay then, right? Of course it's not.
Because you did a video recently with maybe an inflammatory thumbnail, because it had Joe Rogan in it, and I'm not defending Joe Rogan's views on animals at all here.
I think not.
And he had this cowboy dude on his show, whatever.
Taylor Sheridan.
Right, the guy from Yellowstone or something.
Yeah.
But you use maybe inflammatory language in that in that YouTube video. He said the rise of anti-vegan fascism. Now, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, people really got pissed off at me for saying fascist, but I think it's pretty easy to look clearly at what's happening in the US and see that fascism is rising. And when you say fascism, people are like, oh, are you saying that they're Nazis? And I'm not saying that these people are Nazis, but I do think that the years before, it was completely Nazi Germany, looked different to the full-blown fascism, and there are signs that point toward fascism forming, and we're experiencing about all of them here in the US right now. And it's definitely concerning. Anytime there's democracy, there's the threat of fascism. So I think it's just smart to recognize the signs and be aware of them, and to try to push back against it when you can. And I think that Joe Rogan helping elect a president who has said specifically that, he wants to run a third term, that he thinks he won an election, that, the numbers don't support that. We can disagree on that or whatever. But Trump definitely does want ultimate power. So Joe helping elect him, I do think, doesn't mean he's a fascist, but that he could help fascism take over in the US.
Yeah, obviously I can't say that I would agree with you on there, but what is it about? Because look at
yeah, he's not going to defend Joe Rogan, but here comes the defense. Yeah. So
the thing I'd say about Rogan is that I think over the past few years, he's actually been quite monumental in anti-fascist rhetoric. He's wanted small government, freedom of speech. But I don't know about this dude, the cowboy rancher dude, but is it, so it's your position then that Joe Rogan himself is not actually a fascist, but he might be just kind of emboldening the pathway to that somehow?
I don't know enough about Joe Rogan's political views lately to really say if he is or is not a fascist, but yeah, he's definitely emboldening them. And one thing fascist leaders do is they'll say they're in favor of something, but they're not actually in favor of it, right? So just because he says he supports small government doesn't mean that's necessarily true. For Joe, it probably is, but a lot of fascist leaders say stuff like that and then completely go against that. They say they care about the working class. They don't really care about the working class. So I don't think just what he says is a good way to measure whether or not he is or isn't a fascist.
But why not just take people for what they say? Is that not a very kind of cynical, like accusatory viewpoint? You're kind of like saying, no, but this is what you really mean, Joe. Come on.
Yeah, so that's the end of that first section, and of course that's a really interesting end. I mean, they've been talking about the fact that the public don't really tell the truth, when they're being polled and everything, and this is what Natalie was saying. Just because some fascist said or somebody says this, that, and the other, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're telling you the truth. But that's not good for Jordan. No, let's believe what Joe Rogan says. So there you go. Now I've got to do some juggling now, folks. So let me. So I'll bring that down to there, and you can talk amongst yourself while I set up the next bit.
No, I was just going to say as well that sometimes it's not even just about what people say. Obviously, he runs a podcast, so he's always going to make sure that whatever he puts out is kind of selected, and then it obviously gets edited repeatedly before it's put out. Look at his actions. Look at the political campaigns that he supported and enabled, and those kind of things. Look at the high acclaim that he got for being one of those people that helped Trump get re-elected. Look at his actions. Don't worry about some of the things he says on his podcast. Look at what he's doing.
Well, he interviewed Trump, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And I know there was
and I mean, I know there was as to reasons why, but he didn't interview Kamala. So
But
yeah.
I mean, I get confused about this sort of opposition to, this sort of promotion of small government. I mean, surely if we want our fellow animals to be like properly protected, we want a lot of government intervention in that sphere. I mean, is the
well, no, if you change the culture, you wouldn't need that, right?
No, well, I it's the extent to which you change the culture, because if you just look at the hunt ban, I mean, should we in the name of small government, scrap the hunting ban because that's the government intervention? Because the thing is that a very tiny number of people go hunting, right? But unless there's a means to prevent them, they still will do so. I mean, the vast majority, for decades and decades.
We want them to prevent them, Ronnie.
Well, no, but is that, how long is it going to take for that to happen? Now, for decades and decades and decades, we've had, when there's been opinion polls taken on hunting, it's been like, the opposition have been in the 70s.
It's the same with vegan education, Ronnie. Yeah. You're asking people to, let's use this weird language, prevent themselves from.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, but the thing is, are we going to educate, and how long is it going to take us to educate everyone to become philosophically vegan? I say we don't need to educate everyone. We just need to educate enough of us so that we're in charge, and so that we can prevent others from, harming our fellow animals. Because it's like there's there are always going to be people that aren't going to go along with it.
It's a dangerous position, though, Ronnie, in the sense that, I mean, if you like, what the hunting ban did was prevent people. I know it didn't, but it's supposed to have prevented people doing something that they still wanted to do. Now, obviously, much more advantageous for our fellow animals would be to convince them not to want to do it anymore.
Well, yes, but you still have to have measures to deal with those people who still want to do it. The same with anything, it's the same with people that want to go around mugging, and people that want to go around abusing children.
You're getting into the difficult areas of anarchy now, aren't you?
Well, yeah, but you still have to have some way of preventing those people from doing it, because I think it's naive to presume that we're going to be able to educate everyone, and if we are going to be educating everyone, how long is that going to take? I mean, our fellow animals need their proper protection as soon as possible, and that means that people are going to have to be forced to not to do what they want to do.
I understand the point. It's very uncomfortable. Yeah. I mean, the preferred thing would be to.
The preferred thing, but and of course, and I mean, the thing is, you say, even if we were in charge of things, and we did have laws to to sort of enforce the recognition of the rights of other animals, shall we say, then, or you can't force people to recognise the rights of other animals. Of course, they don't want to, but what you can do is prevent people from, doing your best to prevent people from harming other animals through the law. But education can still continue, because then the administration itself can be a force for education. That can use its various means to educate people. So the education never stops.
Yeah, I just find the language of being in charge of a little bit difficult. Well, I mean, at the moment, the people in the States, they want men to be in charge of women.
But it's the reality. It's the reality, isn't it? At the moment, we have a society where, the vast majority of politicians, the people that run the administration, the vast majority of those people are speciesist. We want a situation where the vast majority, and probably everybody that runs things, is vegan. That's what we want, isn't it? And the only way to do that is through vegan education. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a situation of an anarchist society, but I believe that the way you get that is by is through the taking the state and then dismantling it. I think that's the only way you can do it. And that's a kind of more like a socialist view. That's my view of that, how we go about doing that.
Well, it's a Marxist thing about Vanguard and that, isn't
Marxist,
it?
Yeah. I think that's the only way, given what ordinary people are like, that's the only way you can do it. I think that's the only realistic way that can be achieved. And that, once again, that's a long-term thing.
Anyway, before we get bogged down in an anarchy argument, although this is related to what's just coming up, funny enough. So they're going to start talking about whether the movement is left-wing or not. And it's quite interesting because, again, Natalie's got all the stats. And again, George doesn't really, is more kind of like emotional about it. So let's have a look at this.
The reason that I've always publicly said for years, though, on social media, that generally veganism is apolitical, and this is, I guess we're talking about in a different sense here, where I draw the distinction, is that it's politically neutral in that it doesn't have a home like on the left or the right or the center or anything like that. I don't think either side, because the common thing I hear from, because I'm a centrist, right, and the common thing I hear from leftist vegans, intersectionals and the like, is that veganism is a left-wing movement. And I've made...
let me just address Colleen's thing. Well, there's nobody moderating, so I don't understand why that is. It must be just a glitch in the system. So so apologies for that, but nobody's actually doing it. So yeah, sorry about that.
Made videos about this, saying my strong rejection to this idea. Do you think I know most vegans do identify as being on the left. Do you think it is a left-wing movement?
Yeah, so I think that if you just want to say, oh, it's apolitical or it's, it's not mostly left-wing, I would like to see some evidence for that claim, because there is evidence that it is much more of a progressive left-wing position. Number one, a liberal is about 3 times as likely to be vegan than a conservative. Number two, when we did polling when Pro Animal Future did some polling about potential initiatives we should run, and had people say if they're conservative, if they're liberal, how much they support our initiatives. The conservative support was at maybe 25%, whereas the liberal support was like 85%. So I feel that we almost, when I started doing animal rights and politics, I wanted it to be bipartisan. I wanted people to be able to get behind it no matter where they sat on the political line. And that is what I would want if it were up to me. But unfortunately, that's not really what the data is showing us. It does seem like we're going to have to tie ourselves to the left, at least in the US, if we want to be successful in the same way that gay marriage did. I'm not saying that's ideal. I wish it were different, but that just seems to be what's going to happen.
Yeah, so let's just have a look at those figures, because a journal called Society and Animals did this kind of research over many years. It used to be all online. I think there's a paywall now, which is a shame. But generally speaking, all research has come down to the kind of stats that Natalie is given here. That you're much more likely, liberals, and obviously we might have a definitional issue here, but liberals are 3 times more likely to be vegan friendly than conservatives. That's that's kind of set in stone almost. The same would go with anti-hunting, that kind of stuff. And so she's saying in her own campaign they got 25% conservative support, but 85% liberal support. And so because she's kind of going with the stats, that's what they then rely on as part of their rationale for where they would, as it were, aim their claims making, right, and all that. Now, Martin's solution to all that, I think we'll find pretty interesting. Should be coming up now, I think.
Yeah, just very quickly.
Yeah, well, this is where I would reach the opposite conclusion from you. So, yeah, leftists are more likely to go vegan. There's obviously something blocking then right-wing people from going vegan. So what we need to do, in my opinion, is decouple veganism from the left. We have to destroy this idea that it's a leftist movement. Otherwise, we're not going to get right-wingers on board.
We don't want right-wingers on board, George. There's an opposition with the principles of veganism. That's the problem.
Yeah, so he's got this idea, we decouple veganism from its values.
But just very quickly, Roger, sorry to interrupt, but George labels himself as a centrist.
Yeah,
so
centrist,
what's the desperation for this to appeal to right-wingers when that's not even you by admission? Because you're one of these people that I referred to earlier, that in the football stadium, if I said, are you racist? You'd say no, even though you are. Because you can't be honest even about where you stand on the political spectrum.
Well,
you can't even identify yourself as right-winged, because that's going to put you in a position that might make others feel uncomfortable. So you're going to sit somewhere in the middle and deceive people. That's why we can't trust what people say.
Yeah, well, his ultimate position, he would claim, is that he doesn't want to make the movement toxic to the left, but wants to attract the right. And so that's the problem, because the more you attract the right, the more toxic it becomes to the left, where the support has always been in the first place.
Yeah,
so,
we don't want to make the feminism movement toxic to the women, but we just want to bring in the men. Yeah, there's a fundamental problem there that's being ignored. That's the issue. Yeah, there's a conflict of principles. Right-wing values and vegan values oppose each other. There's no mash that we can have, because the right-wing values are the ones that need deconstructing, and that's not going to happen. So what he's trying to say is we need to basically dilute vegan values or change.
That's what they do,
values.
though, Andy.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing already. So why does he want any change for? It's already happening. It's been happening throughout.
So they go, okay, so let's all shelve our human politics and then concentrate on veganism as animals only, concentrate on veganism as a diet, because people won't argue then.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, how many other people are also trying to do this? I mean, this has been his agenda now for as long as I can remember. And it's like, why don't you just admit that you don't want to deal with your prejudices? You just want to be accepted with them in the vegan community. That would be a much more honest position, wouldn't it?
Any comment before we move on, Ronnie?
Well, I'd be interested to know what George's definition of veganism is, and then to look at how that was consistent with right-wing values. That's the thing. What does he think veganism is? Because
he thinks there's lots of vegan values which are right-wing. That's what he thinks.
Well, I'd be interested to know what values those are, to be honest.
Well, he says one thing which is coming up, which is protecting the weak and the innocent.
Well, I regard that as a left-wing value, to be clear.
Yeah, sorry. Protecting the weak and the innocent from who? The right?
From harm, I suppose you might say.
Yeah, so, which comes from where? Predominantly the right? Predominantly white men? I mean, which one of these demographics does he think that he's excluded?
Well, if you talk about our fellow animals, everybody eats them and exploits them, right? And oppresses them. So it'll be protecting from everyone. I mean, like from the other 99%, say. So it's not left and right in that particular aspect.
But what is it? I mean, if we're looking at humans, what is it in the world that harms the weak and the innocent the most? I mean, warfare is one thing, isn't it? Inequality is another thing.
Yeah, well, later on, they both come out as pro-gun.
Prejudice, discrimination, these arbitrary lines that the right are really pro and the left are really against. So, like, yeah, it's the right.
So it seems to be that it's those with sort of what might be termed as right-wing values, like military and supremacist attitudes, like economic attitudes, for instance, where it's not about distribution of wealth and resources. It's those attitudes that are harming the helpless and the weak, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my
Those
nan
right-wing
taught me this.
attitudes.
I don't know if you know
Yeah.
this slogan, Ronnie, you probably do, but my nan taught me when I was young that the way to remember how to screw or unscrew like a bolt or a screw was that the left liberates and the right oppresses. And that always stuck with me. And it's like, yeah, the right tightens and the left loosens. And the way it was described was the left liberates and the right oppresses. And like those words meant nothing to me as a child, but they mean everything now because I see it each and every single day. So it's not necessarily the right, i.e., the people that it's that those principles, it's that mentality, it's that ideology that we can do this and it's okay. Who cares about the victim as long as I benefit from this? And it's almost always the right that oppresses the left, or it's almost always the right that potentially victimizing someone else. All those values.
Yes, the values. It's kind of, you talk about what values are normally considered as left and what values are normally considered as right, and then look at those values in terms of, do they cause oppression or do they cause liberation?
Well, you're going to love it when he gets onto vegan masculinity. So shall we move on a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we had unlimited time and maybe animals weren't tortured by the billions every second, I think we'll have more success faster if we just try to increase our left support rather than trying to decrease our left support to try to get more right-wing support. I just don't see that happening. The right also has such strong ideas of meat and masculinity, and they already have the meat industry is already so tied to their identity. I feel like it would take a very long time to undo that. So I think it'd be a lot quicker to go the other route.
Well, what I'm saying to do is not to push leftist people away from veganism. I think we need to advance it in a theory neutral way that ties in with values of both the left and the right. We could play on the whole if there's this whole masculinity idea on the right, this real men eat meat and they own the ranch in Kentucky or wherever it is. And my father was a steer and, he told me, son, you better not be no soy boy when you grow up, and all this crap that, anti-vegans on the right might put out. Okay, why don't we talk about how veganism ties in with those positive ideas of masculinity, protecting the weak, protecting the defenseless? We can draw a link between both the pro-choice side on the left and the pro-life side on the right. We can talk about, with the right-wing Christians, we can talk about, we've got documentaries like Christspiracy, made by a conservative Christian who's a Bible expert. Talk about how a vegan diet was the original diet of man before the fall of man, before sin. This is what God said is the perfect world, the paradise.
Yeah, veganism isn't a diet. Never mind.
It's the Garden of Eden before humans cocked it all up and we have the sinful world that we do now. Personal
I think what Ronnie said in the last segment's really true. We need to know what George thinks veganism means in order to fully understand his position, because I'm confused about what his definition of veganism is. And I think that he is, by the sounds of it.
Well, so far it's a diet, I think.
Well, that's very much how it's being explained, isn't it? So it's kind of like you don't seem to understand the fundamentals of this. You're failing to look at, for example, if we were looking at the idea of men being
to understand, Andy, it's rejection of that, the fundamental.
Well, then how do you expect to achieve liberation even for non-human animals? Because all you're doing, in theory, if he gets his own way, is bringing in speciesists into a movement so that they can walk around with the quote-unquote vegan flag, but they still discriminate against anyone that best serves them too, because that's not been challenged in any way, shape or form. It's just been sort of like pandered to.
Well, if you've got a reduced vision of veganism, then you're okay, aren't you?
No. I mean, it would reduce the amount of victims, but it would never eradicate animal use, because it's not even, I mean, let's just say, for example, we get to go to all these big gyms with all these people, and we get to bring in, 5 million more men that once upon a time used to think that they needed meat in order to be big and tough. unless we're explaining to them what veganism means and how they're going to have to unpack all of the other prejudices that they harbor, they're not vegan. We're not creating a vegan world. We're just creating more plant-based people. So it really does fall back into what is his definition of veganism? What is he hoping to achieve?
Well, maybe to somebody in the comments that know to know what his definition is. But I mean, if you've got all these, masculine vegans in the gym, I think for a lot of people, when they're plant-based and they throw away all the leather stuff and they buy synthetic instead, then they're in then, right? Regardless of the other stuff, because that's the advantage of being a reducitarian vegan, and there's loads of them now.
I mean, obviously it's better for them to wear non-leather instead of leather. It's better if they, they consume a vegan diet rather than a diet that involves the exploitation of fellow animals. Obviously, those things are better, but that isn't veganism. That's not veganism, is it? It's an improvement, but it's not. It's not veganism.
No. Okay. I think we're agreed on that then. So let's just move on. There's only a couple minutes left on this. Well, about 4 minutes left on this second section.
Because let me tell you my view as a centrist, right? I'm critical about aspects of both the left and the right. Mm-hmm. One of the things I hate as a centrist is that on the left, everything is always someone else's fault. There's no personal responsibility, in my opinion. Whereas on the right, what I tend to prefer about the right wing in this, with regards to this aspect, is that, if you commit a crime, it's your fault. It's not the system or something. Or if you...
The problem with this is like first year sociology seminar stuff. It's kind of shallow, naive stuff that he's coming out with here. He always says that he's got critique of the left and the right, and then he always just goes for what's wrong with the left. He always does that. But I mean, the personal responsibility thing is interesting, but the left, I don't think, it's kind of like blame the system. Now, the right always say that the left blame the system and they absolve the individual from any responsibility at all. But I think that is untrue and quite a shallow position myself.
I don't think that's totally true, but I think it's important to emphasize the importance of individual moral responsibility of people for their own actions. And does the left do that sufficiently? I'm not sure. To be quite honest,
where they don't.
There is no system separate from the actions of individual people. We're not the Borg out of Star Trek. We don't operate according to a hive mind. The system comprises of individuals working together, but those people are still individuals with their own views, opinions, and actions based on those views and opinions. So it's really important to change people as individuals and to,
of course,
responsibility of people for their own actions.
I don't think anyone on the left would disagree with you, would they, Ronnie?
Hopefully they wouldn't. But you hear a lot of talk on the left about the system. Let's smash the system. We want system change, when that doesn't seem to be related to individual change. When if you want system change, that only comes about through individual change. If you don't change individuals, you don't change the system. And I don't think,
as you said, they're linked. Yeah. I would say as a sociologist, there's the micro and the macro, and the great skill is to be able to slide between the two. And so look at it from a system level and look at it from the level of the family or individuals.
Yeah,
so they're linked.
Yeah, absolutely. But but yeah. So yeah, I mean, as you say, I think he's inaccurate there about the left. It isn't so. It's not so clear cut as he's saying. I don't think.
No. Well, let's see what else he says. I think he's got some more on this thing.
You commit a terror attack, it's your fault. It's not because, X country is being bombed or whatever it is. I think personal responsibility is a huge value that we can drive, that we can link to the right. So what I'm saying is, Natalie, not to push leftists away from it, but we can draw on values from whatever someone's ideology is, whether they're a capitalist, whether they're a communist, if they're a Christian, if they're a Muslim. I just rambled a lot there, but tell me your thoughts on what I'm kind of saying there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not against trying to increase our support on the right. And obviously, there are a lot of things in animal rights that they should agree with based on their values. And that is why I do like how there are conservative vegans who do speak to conservatives well, and I really do value them and appreciate them. And when we run our campaigns in more purple places where like there's a bigger population of conservatives, we're certainly going to do things to try to bring them on board.
Yeah.
I just don't want us to, I want us to stay realistic. And yeah, once I saw those polling numbers for how many conservatives would support a factory farm ban, and it was just like so low compared to the liberals, I was just thinking maybe it's not even a strategy worth pursuing. Like, how much would it increase support? They're also very, very free market, and that's kind of a tough value to fight against. But yeah, I also just disagree with that whole premise of personal responsibility. I love personal responsibility for myself. I don't know if you like stoicism at all, but it's very focused on your actions and what you can control. But one of my favorite quotes is to be strict with yourself and tolerant of others. So like, yes, I will, lean on personal responsibility for myself, but also recognize that systems are in place that do influence that people act, even as simple as being at the grocery store and things mostly being animal products and that being cheaper. Like, I think that's a system that has really negative impacts. And if we say the system isn't causing people to eat animal products at all, then that would just be a complete delusion. So I think that we need some of it.
Which is why you can talk to a right winger about how grocery prices skyrocketed under Biden.
Sure. And they're skyrocketed now. So I know. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Martin always does this. Yeah. In his mind, Biden is left wing.
Yeah, and also I thought the example he just made was that the right can always take accountability, but yet when she pointed out it's still low, it's like, but move away from that.
I think another thing is like you're kind of, he's saying about meeting people where they are, that, say if someone's a Christian, you look at where, Christian values.
A belief system, by the way.
Sorry?
Which is a belief system, like capitalism.
Yeah. Or if someone's a capitalist or whatever, then you look at how you can, how veganism fits with that. But you see, I think you've got to also look at how those particular political positions, political views, belief systems themselves drive the oppression of our fellow animals. For instance, capitalism derives the oppression of our animals horrendously, and it drives consumption, consumerism, it drives overproduction, it drives industrialization, it drives all these things that are really harmful to our fellow animals as a system. So if someone is a capitalist, just by being a capitalist, they're contributing to all that, whatever their diet is, if you see what I mean. So it's very hard to align, I would say, capitalism with veganism for that reason. That's not to say that, other systems, other political economic systems that have called themselves left-wing, like the Soviet system and stuff like that. That's not to say that that therefore those were in alignment with veganism, because you still had systems that drove production, that drove consumption, that drove the destruction of the natural world, for instance. And so I think if we are going to have an economics that's, like it's kind of animal liberationist economics, that's going to be an economics that is of the left. It's not going to be, similar to other economic systems that have been claimed in the past to be of the left, but it's certainly got to be a system that's of something like donut economics. Advise people to have a look at some videos on donut economics, for instance, which is, I'd say, is a left-wing economic system, for instance, and religion. Religion just of itself, has caused horrendous oppression of our fellow animals, because most religions carry within themselves the idea that humans are more important than other animals. So that actual belief itself, is harmful to animal liberation. So I think those things have to be taken into consideration.
Somebody like Tobias Leonard, Ronnie, would say, okay, Ronnie Lee, does that mean that vegans have got to be atheists?
Well, I wouldn't put it like that. I'd say that, a vegan had a religious belief. I'd ask someone, how would you see that as consistent with veganism, or certain aspects of that belief? How are those aspects of that belief consistent with veganism? Because if someone believes in a religion that is like human supremacist in its in its attitudes, that we're the kind of humans made in the image of God, for instance, that kind of attitude, which is prevalent in some religions. How is that consistent with veganism? How is that consistent with animal liberation? It's about these things being consistent with veganism, isn't it? People's other views, apart from that, people say, well, we don't want our fellow animals to be exploited. We don't want our fellow animals to be oppressed. We're going to adopt a diet and a lifestyle that's in accordance with that. Yeah, you can say all that. But what other things do you believe in? And what other things do you do aren't actually consistent with that?
Yeah, and I think the other part, just to quickly add on to that, is it also begs the question of like where their loyalty would lie. Like, just for example, without picking on Christians, let's just say tomorrow they found a New Testament somewhere and it came out and said that white people were top of this hierarchy, women should be treated in this particular way. Where would their loyalty be? Would it be first to veganism, or would it be first to Christianity? Because there are already huge conflicts, but there could be even worse ones. The problem with religion now is that people cherry pick. Whether they're Christian, for example, they'll outright deny the slavery within their own book. They'll outright deny the oppression and violence within their own book. But obviously, that's always the question you've got too, because there obviously are people that are fundamentally religious and vegan, and those two things kind of harmonize quite well. But they obviously cherry pick the things that they believe from their specific religion in order for that to work. And that would always be my concern, is where does that loyalty shift?
Right. We're coming up to the end of this section. There's about 2 minutes to go. What's the score about this, people? Because I can get captions on my YouTube here on my screen, but is it just because I'm hosting this, or is it everybody could do it?
I don't know, because we're in StreamYard, so I don't know what YouTube displays at the moment. In theory, they have to watch them as long as they're turned on. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so what the end section here, and Natalie's reply to this is really good. But what George Martin often says is that his best bit of outreach ever was to right-wing people, and he says this over and over again. Her response is really excellent.
Here's what. Okay, I think so. Here's the thing. The reason I think that there's seemingly a lesser receptiveness to veganism on the right than there is on the left is because we're not advocating in the right way to the right. I've seen so many vegans who want to cannibalize our own movement by completely shutting out the right, by just saying that, oh, veganism is not for you. If you have this view on this, get the fuck out. You're not welcome in the movement. Why don't we put, like, if we actually get the right people to advocate it to the right way, to the right wing, then I think we're going to have much higher numbers on the right. And this is
So how do you advocate veganism to the right?
Well, you see, the thing is, I think with advocating veganism, you've got to find something in someone that they relate to anyway, haven't you? You've got to kind of get them to make the connection between something they already believe and with veganism. So that would be, the difficulty, wouldn't it?
Well, he'd say protecting the pure and innocent, and
I tell you what, Ronnie, it's much easier to get them to go vegan if you mislead them into what they think veganism is.
Well,
in these conversations, he hasn't said, look, you're not going to be able to harbor those racist views anymore. You're not going to be able to be transphobic anymore. You're not going to be able to disrespect women anymore. Those things are not compatible. I'm sure they didn't come up in the conversation. But if you mislead people and say, hey, it's just about no longer consuming or wearing animal products, probably much easier, yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course it would be, because then that isn't veganism, isn't it? It's only part of veganism.
Well, we're back to the same thing again, isn't it? That if you reduce veganism, then you can then aim it at the right. I suppose that's the argument. Anyway, let's see the rest of this 2 minutes, and then we have to decide whether we're going to do the third section or not.
Anecdotal, but the best piece of activism I ever did, the most successful piece of advocacy that I've ever personally undertaken myself, was speaking to a totally right-wing, like MAGA audience. Do you know who David Nino Rodriguez is?
Mm-mm.
So he's a former professional boxer, and he runs the YouTube channel Nino's Corner. And he's like, a truther, big Trumpster. All his like listeners, watchers, whatever, are big like Christians and very right-leaning. And he got me on his show because a certain person who I will not name, who produced a very famous documentary in the vegan movement, put out this sneering, Natalie, public statement like, no, I will not go on your racist, anti-science show. Didn't you get the message at the end of my documentary that veganism is about ending all forms of oppression or something like that? So I got wind of this ridiculous refusal to go on the show and advocate to hundreds of thousands of people. And I said, you know what, fuck it, I'll go on then. And I went on, Natalie, and I talked to Nino about, I think he thought he was in for an easy ride. I thought he thought,
yeah, they always do.
Right. I think he thought, who's this, guy gonna come on trying to convince me not to do this? And he was so visibly upset, Natalie, with what I showed him, the footage of the pigs in the gas chambers, the chicks being shredded alive. Oh my God, when I showed him the footage of the calf being taken away from the mother, that really got him. I was watching the live chat. There was all these tears in I'm never eating dairy again. Well, I got messages to my Instagram. Thank you. I'm a fan of Nino's Corner. I will never eat animal products again. Thanks to you. These were all people firmly on the right. I've never had any kind of leftist audience that I've advocated to, like at a university or anything like that, react in the same way.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see if
I don't want to slam that down by any
means.
means.
Voting on stuff.
But his best, most successful piece of activism was showing some clips of Dominion to people. Yeah, it is a motive. That's why the films are made. That's why people hold up screens in the street. Didn't you used to do that with AV for a long time? Isn't that literally what you did? Like, what's the success here? You showed people an emotive piece of film and they acted emotionally to it. Yeah. How many of them are vegan?
Well, he's saying that he got a lot of success.
But where? because they reacted to a film, but they do that in the street. There's nothing to do with whether they're right or left. But if people were going to react emotively to something that's emotional, that's a natural human response. That's why people cover their kids' eyes.
Yeah, well, essentially that's what Natalie says coming up now.
Oh, good.
If those people actually went vegan, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, who knows? But I'm not saying people should not speak to audiences who are mostly right wing. And yeah, it's kind of a tough question. Like if you have someone in your animal rights group who has some problematic views in other areas, do you kick them out? Like I would say no. But also it's kind of the same mindset of human supremacy, right? Like if you're saying, oh, humans can do whatever to animals because they're lesser than us, and if you're saying, oh, white people are better than black people, like that's still that supremacist mindset, which I do think is problematic. And I certainly wouldn't want that to be rampant in the animal rights movement, because I do think we should stand against all oppression.
Right. Okay. So that's the end of section 2, folks. So
the thing is as well, I'd just say when you're in the street doing advocacy or even advocacy at an event, you don't know the politics of the people that are coming up. Some of them may be right wing. You don't know unless you engage in kind of conversation with them and they talk about that. So, when I don't think we are particularly advocating to left-wing people. We're just advocating to the public in general, and they'll have varying political views, won't they?
Yeah, I suppose the interesting thing about that, Ronnie, is the fact that he says, well, if you're right-wing, go away, we say, we're not interested. Now, we don't tend to say go away to anybody. What we really do is say, well, these are the values of veganism. What do you think of that? And if they reject those because they're right wing, then they reject veganism, right? And so just the way that some people on the left will use their values to reject veganism. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism. That kind of leftist argument, right? So obviously on the street you don't know who you're talking to, but you always talk to them about vegan values. And then they've got to assess whether they, agree with it. What do they make of it? What would it like for them to adhere to them? And that would be the process of becoming a vegan, wouldn't it? For anybody. So essentially, if you ditched your extreme right-wing values for vegan values, then there's no problem. What George wants is for people to keep them and still be welcome to the movement, right? So that's the problematic area, it seems to me. Keeping your far right values and then entering the vegan movement, that's the problem. If you were to modify those values because you've heard about vegan values instead, then that isn't a problem. Does that make sense?
Well, it's about consistency, isn't it? About people saying that or claiming to be vegan and holding views really that are inconsistent with veganism, isn't it? It's trying to get people to be consistent.
Yeah, but that's why they reduce it down to a diet or animals only, because you're eliminating all those problems. I mean, this is Tobias Leonhardt, straight off. It's kind of like, get rid of all the human stuff and then we can all agree, right?
But it's also eliminating areas in which our fellow animals are oppressed, isn't it? That we know that capitalism is a major driver of the oppression of our fellow animals.
Well, George wouldn't agree with that.
Well, it certainly drives consumption, doesn't it? And that in turn drives production, it drives industrialization, it drives.
Well, a lot of influencers would say consumption is not the problem so long as it's vegan consumption.
Well, one example I always give of that and there's many examples, is we regard cotton, wouldn't we, as a vegan product, and that nothing wrong with wearing cotton. Now there's been an inland lake called the Aral Sea in sort of Central Asia that's been virtually destroyed through cotton production. And so, I don't know, myriads of our fellow animals have perished because of that. That was their home, that was their homeland. That's through production of an item that would be
even more uncomfortable than that is that black t-shirts are popular within the vegan movement, but black dye is the worst one.
Well, it's just over. That's right. And what happens is because it's cheaper, these products are originate in countries where the environmental regulations are kind of non-existent, and so it's okay to put stuff into the rivers. The cheapest way of doing it, and all of this is because people want far more of these things than they actually need. And so, therefore, but these are all products that would be deemed to be suitable for vegans. So
even palm oil, right? A lot of people will avoid it, but there's nothing inherently non-vegan about palm oil. And yet, think about the destruction that something like that causes. And there's so many of these examples where that particular ingredient doesn't actually fall into a non-vegan thing. But yet,
I used to boycott palm oil for years. But the problem is, when you start researching it, to replace palm oil requires about 5 other types of oils.
It's the amount of what it is palm oil requires far less land to produce a similar amount of oil than other oil, other crops that oil yielding crops, and that's the difficulty. But all of them, but it's consuming more than we actually need. That's the problem, isn't it? We always have to consume. We have to eat and we have to clothe ourselves, but it's the over consumption of these things, and capitalism drives that. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, to finish my smug point, I've got a white shirt on. I've noticed that you and Andy have got a black shirt, and those two on the screen have got a black shirt.
They do, yes. Yeah. I mean, my position is that I've now put a moratorium on myself of getting t-shirts. I no longer buy anymore. So that's what I've done about
you just wait for people to give them to you.
I'd kind of probably make it known to people that I don't need anymore.
What's that one say, Andy?
This was a gift. It says no excuse for animal use, but this was my NARM t-shirt from last year, and it was a gift.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I'm getting plenty of use.
I think the other thing is because a load of my t-shirts have sort of pro-vegan slogans on, and I'd probably do a bit of a utilitarian calculation saying,
I don't know if you're the same as me, Ronnie, but pretty much all of the white t-shirts that I had that have got vegan messages either no longer fit me the same now, or they're no longer white. Whereas obviously the black ones, they're always like, some of the even some of like the light blue t-shirts that I've got, they seem to, once they get a bit dirty, they don't go clean again.
What's wrong with things that are no longer white? Are you a white supremacist suddenly now?
No, but obviously, like I've got a t-shirt, for example, that's got it's like a coloured logo, and then it's got a white deer's head in the middle, and it's got like a yellow tinge to it now, almost like the deer's been smoking for 30 years. It just looks strange.
I think it's just that there was something that something Louise told me about. She said there was an article somewhere by a guy that's into sustainable clothing, and he's done a lot of research into clothing. He reckons there's enough clothes in the world to clothe the next 7 generations.
Oh, there's tons. Honestly, that you see the clothes that goes to landfill and stuff like that. It's ridiculous. Yeah,
I mean that's horrendous, isn't it? You think of the impact on the natural world and our fellow animals that inhabit that through the production, the transportation of those garments.
There is a campaign, isn't there, against buying new garments, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's good. I mean, and that to me, that's consistent with veganism. That be part of the vegan ethic to support that campaign. It's the same as supporting campaigns, to encourage people not to fly in airplanes because of the heavy impact on the climate of of the of air transportation, stuff like that. To me, all of that is all consistent. That's all consistent with the
one memory I have of the 1980s is that apart from underwear, most people wore stuff from charity shops.
I used to get most stuff from charity shops.
The problem that you've got now is a lot of the charity shops closed down, don't they? We had like a surge, about 10 years or so ago, where there was 3 or 4 in our town centre, and I think there's one left now out of all of those.
What's happening is that the thing is they're tending to charge more for stuff, and you do get charity shops that sell new stuff as well as the second-hand stuff, and they're being undercut by places like Primark. It's cheaper to go in Primark than in a charity shop, and I think charity shops charge too much for stuff.
Yeah, it is true. You can get a new shirt cheaper than a second-hand one from a charity.
Yeah. And I think it's charity shops charging too much, because I think if they charged less, then they'd sell more, because they'd be able to compete sort of favourably with the places that sell new items cheaply.
Right, we've got a decision to make. We've got about about 7 minutes left. So this is for section 3. So do you want to do that, or have we gone on too much?
How long have we gone?
We might. I mean, it doesn't seem worth coming back for 7 minutes if that's all that's actually left.
It's how long we make that. But
it's just how many.
We've already gone on for more than 2 hours.
So the subject in this bit are really quite interesting. First of all, George has got an attitude that everybody, left or right, vegan or not, are oppressive to somebody else on some level. Then they talk about gun control, and Natalie's position on gun control is really interesting, because she's pro-gun, but also notices that it could lead to kind of racist problems, which is quite interesting. And then we've got towards the end this idea that there are more anti-vegan arguments on the left than there are on the right. Now, I think the analysis of that again is incredibly shallow, but we'll get to that. That's in about 6 or 7 minutes time. So let me start this. Ready to go?
Yep.
I want oppression to be eliminated from the world. But the thing is, every single person is oppressive to someone else. This is why I just hate intersectionality. So every single person that you know has views that are deemed to be bigoted, discriminatory, evil, oppressive, backwards to another person. So even this is why.
Can you give examples?
Okay. What's your position on gun control?
Oof, I'm gonna out myself as I'm pretty pro-gun, honestly.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's an example.
Okay. So I think that we need to be able to protect ourselves. We need to be able to learn how to use them. I am not great at shooting a gun. My husband has gotten a few. He's learned how to shoot. I think that it could get very violent in the US pretty soon. And the other problem, and I know you're going to disagree with me on this one, is that the gun control laws, if we did enact them, could disproportionately harm minorities, because they would get refused gun ownership much more often than white people. So it would end up being a much more racist system where a bunch of white people have guns and minorities don't.
So here's the funny thing. Either position you said on that, and by the way, this is groundbreaking episode of the Carners and Debunk podcast. Natalie Fulton from Pro Animal Future is pro-gun. Who the fuck would have thought this? And this is a great example. I actually thought you were going to be anti-gun, right? And I was going to say, okay, so, someone might say, oh, Natalie Fulton wants to disarm women who want to protect themselves from their rapist or whatever, walking home at night. So that was one example I'm going to give. You threw me off. You've gone the other way, which is fine. You said, I'm pro-gun. Okay, so now millions of people think, Natalie, that you're this lunatic who wants people to be able to shoot up fucking schools.
Let me just clarify that being pro-gun in the US is probably pretty different than being pro-gun in the UK. I feel like it would be a much more extreme position
I think that's a really good point because, I mean, being pro-gun in Britain is completely different, I presume, to the States.
It would be. I just wonder how many people in the UK have been killed in shooting incidents compared with people in the USA. If we
Well, it's
kind of
minute, isn't it? It's
if we
minute.
average it out according to population,
Yeah.
right, per person, you know, averaging it out, like what is the percentage of people in the UK that have been killed by guns compared with the people in the USA? And then if the percentage is fewer in the UK, then surely that's a really powerful argument for gun control, isn't it?
Well,
Because the more guns you've got, surely the more guns you've got amongst the more people are going to be killed by guns. Doesn't that make sense?
yeah, that's right. And, you know, comedians make that point, but the response to that is, why should it only be the cops who've got guns?
Why should it only be the cops that got guns? Well, I suppose.
Why have the cops got to have guns?
Say again, Andy. Sorry.
So
Well, I
why,
think
why have the cops got to keep their
the
guns?
reason why the
Gun control should mean gun control, not gun control for
the reason
many
why
others.
the reason why the cops have got guns is because we haven't got total gun control, isn't it? Because you've got some criminals with guns. They're still able, although guns are, it's illegal to have those guns. Those criminals still have those guns, and that would be the argument.
True. But in the UK, for example, like if you'll never see, unless they're responding to an incident or at the airport or one of a number of other very unique situations, you would never be able to steal a gun off a police officer and use that gun to eliminate other people, where that's every single day in America. So the argument is always the pedestrians aren't willing to give up their arms because the police keep theirs. But why isn't the argument ever, well, the police need to give up theirs as well? They can have SWAT teams like we do.
It was true.
But dangerous people exist everywhere. You have armed response teams that deal with armed situations, but people shouldn't be walking into a donut shop with a fucking gun hanging out of their arm. Like, that's not acceptable. That shouldn't be okay. That shouldn't be normalized. You know, there shouldn't be people that walk around with them in view all the time.
It's something that's become far more prevalent here in the UK in recent years. There was a time really when I think the police over here didn't have guns. And I don't know.
It was a big shock when they started to have guns, especially when they were openly having them.
Yeah. There was a time that when perhaps there were guns, but they were used so very rarely. But,
I remember going to a bus station once, and there was these coppers with guns, and it was a big shock.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you kind of see them everywhere now. But at one time, that wasn't the case.
No.
And is it a safer? Are we safer now because the police have guns? I'm not sure we are we?
I don't know. I'll ask you the question. You know, the odd times when you've been to like the airport or somewhere like that, and the odd times as like British people, you've experienced a police officer with a gun. Do you feel safer or do you feel more at risk? Because I'll tell you, I've never felt safer seeing a police officer with a machine gun strapped around his shoulder. I always feel more at risk. And that actually extends to if I'm walking down the street and the police are walking down the other side of the road, which is the absolute opposite of the effect that they're supposed to have. They're supposed to make me feel safe and comfortable knowing, hey, if anything happens, the police are there. But actually the effect is, well, hang on a minute, they better not try and arrest me for something.
No, but that's the variable that you're missing out, Andy, because if nothing happens, you don't feel safe. But the argument is that if something did happen, then you would feel safe.
But the fact that there's a gun there all someone's got to do is get hold of that, pull the trigger and spin around in a circle, and 500 people could die. If that gun didn't exist in the first place, that's never an option.
Well, didn't you just say 5 minutes ago that people don't take guns from the police?
No, I'm saying how it does happen. That happens all the time. This is my argument. Should a police officer be able to walk into a subway to get his lunch and have his gun taken out of his holster by a child and kill someone? And that's a genuine case that I'm referring to. That should never happen.
I was a bit confused because I thought you'd said the opposite.
No, sorry. Yeah, like to clarify, I think that like in the UK, having a SWAT team or a team that respond because someone else is a liability or a danger, we have to have that because people can't be trusted. Does that mean that every police officer should walk around with a firearm in their pocket? No, I think that's absolutely wrong. And especially when the amount of times that people are so quick to pull it out, and it gives them this illusion of authority of, even though what I'm doing is corrupt, you'll do it because I'm pointing a gun at you. That's not okay either. That's literally the tyranny that people are supposed to be armed to protect themselves from. And it doesn't happen, does it? How many of these people who are armed to a teeth, how many people with like AR-15s, for example, are defending themselves from Donald Trump? None of them. Most of them would have voted for him. So they don't defend themselves from tyranny. They perpetuate it. And they use this fear of what might happen as exactly the reasoning to continue perpetuating it. And I think that's what needs to be addressed. And it never is. Who are they actually protecting themselves from? It's the right to bear arms to protect yourself from a tyrannical government or authority. Well, there's been one in place the whole time you've been alive and you've done nothing. You've done nothing but prey on innocent people. Those are the victims.
And how many of these guns? Because it's not just guns being sort of licensed, people being able to obtain guns like really easily in order to use those guns against other humans. It's sort of, you know, how many of these guns are used against our fellow animals? If anyone's able to just get a gun really easily,
or just indiscriminately, yeah.
Well,
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely,
think of how many. I think of how many dogs are shot because police officers carry guns versus how many dogs are hit with a truncheon, for example. It's very easy to pull the trigger when you've got a gun in your holster. It's not so easy to think about how you're going to deal with something if you don't have that option. And so, like, yeah, I think this. I understand the fact that you've got people that are walking around as criminals who are armed to the teeth, and therefore there needs to be people who are appropriately armed to defend against that. But is that every police officer? Is every single criminal a gun-toting maniac? No. So does every police officer need to be a gun-toting maniac? No.
I don't think it's every police officer, but it's certainly a lot more than it used to be. No, in terms of what I, you know.
There's a comedian who says, when he's talking about gun control, you do realize that in a society with more telephones, more calls are made.
Well, I mean that's absolutely true, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think you've got to look at it on a societal level, you know, and like, you know, how many people are killed because of guns. I mean, we've had examples here of, you know, mass shootings where it was someone that had, where either they had the gun themselves lawfully, or a member of their family had the gun lawfully, and they were able to take that gun and, you know, go on the rampage.
We need a dad's army system. Just as a pop quiz, who knows what SWAT means?
I don't know what their acronym stands for.
Do you know, Ronnie?
Special.
It's one of those weird ones where everybody says it, but they don't. A lot of people don't know what it means. It means special weapons and tactics.
Oh, I was going to say assault team, special weapons, assault team, and tactics. Okay. Well, what are the tactics then? Turn up and pull the trigger.
No,
I mean, it's pretty much the same tactic, regardless of the situation, isn't it? They turn up, they shoot someone, and then they say it wasn't our fault. It looked like they had a weapon.
Oh, you're so cynical, young man.
Yeah, well, am I wrong?
Right. Well, being cynical and not wrong, they can live together, can't they? Right. Let's finish this off then.
There than it is here. There are quite a few people, especially in the animal rights movement, that are pro-gun as well.
Yeah, but this is a fantastic example. So here's the thing. This is what, so the average intersectional is going to disagree with you vehemently on this. They massively are against the Second Amendment.
Not necessarily, not based on the people that I know.
So
yeah, that's not fair. The way that he's just described that they're against the Second Amendment. No, they're against violence, George, and you want to project what their ideals are so that you can play the victim. That's the problem with this. All of this is that it's always about ignoring the reasoning behind why people think something. and just being upset by the fact that they think those things.
Yeah, and there's a wider vegan point, isn't there, that we tend to be opposed to weapons and arms. I mean, Ronnie, you say over and over again, warfare. How many of our fellow animals get killed?
Yeah. The main victims of modern warfare aren't humans. I mean, it's terrible enough for humans, because what you've got, war used to be like a load of guys in a field, like with stabbing each other with swords, didn't it, at one time? And so you didn't really get, non-combatants, killed in the war. I mean, it's terrible enough anyway, how it was then. But now, with the use of high explosives, it's been going on well for decades now, since the First World War. Certainly, you're getting far more civilian victims, far more non-combatants killed. I mean, look at Gaza.
I think that's really key as well, Ronnie, because even if
Yeah.
someone pushed back on that and said, you know what, in the days of William Wallace, they used to cut down all these forests for like siege weapons, for example. Okay, you could maybe make that argument, but they weren't having like raw chemical materials that were poisoning the water.
But the main victims, even then, although it's horrific for the civilian casualties, the main victims in terms of numbers aren't humans; they're our fellow animals. All these animals that live amongst us. The birds and the rats and the mice, the other small mammals. Fishes in rivers, and in the sea, other sea living beings, where these areas are polluted through the use of weapons, and the effect on the climate is warfare and the use of high explosives. It's a pretty big driver of the climate crisis. So we've got that to be taken into consideration. There was a survey done into the Iraq war, which I think was it in the early 2000s, wasn't it? The Gulf War, sorry. And that survey came to the conclusion that I think the number of human victims was about 60,000. The number of victims among our fellow animals was 1 million. And I think Roger and I discussed this on one of our shows, and we came to the conclusion that the 1 million was probably a huge underestimate of the number of our fellow animals that was killed. And that's the type of thing, and that's going to be replicated in other wars where high explosives were used. So it's very much a vegan issue to oppose warfare, to call for immediate ceasefires in all wars that are taking place, and to call for the end of the arms trade. Those are all positions that are,
vegans have almost like automatically going to have a critical stance on weaponry.
Absolutely.
Whether it's mass destruction or not. I mean, we're talking about weapons that kill, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, look, we've got just less than 4 minutes to go, so I'll let this run. And this is where we get into our kind of interesting talking point about the left and the right in relation to anti-vegan stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah. I've seen pretty much everyone that I've seen on the left in the vegan movement is anti-gun. Mm-hmm. So this is just one example.
I think that's also partly because it's such a non-violent movement, and we are so sensitive to violence against animals, so certainly more toward humans. So that could be specifically vegan intersectionalists as well.
There's another thing I wanted to mention as well. Okay, the right makes all these ridiculous anti-vegan arguments. Okay, they have this whole kind of soy boy thing, blah blah blah. One observation I've made over the years, Natalie, is that the left actually has more of these. The left actually has more anti-vegan arguments than the right. Have you noticed this? So I was actually racking my brains recently to even think of a right-wing argument that's against veganism. And that was the only one that someone actually brought it to my attention. They said, yeah, George, you do make a point that there's more anti-vegan arguments on the left. But right-wingers do say all this crap like soy boy and all this kind of nonsense. But have you noticed that the left has a bunch of specifically leftist anti-vegan arguments, some of which you've covered in your videos?
I'm glad you brought this up. I don't want to go too much into the Ali Tabrizi thing, but I am making a video about him and background for anyone. And I was messaging George about it, this argument he used. And you were like, oh, that's totally a left-wing argument. You can't try to paint him as right for that. But I actually found the opposite, because basically what he was saying is he's saying, oh, there's this single mother, and vegan activists are always saying, oh, just eat rice and beans, it's cheap. And that is something that leftists do with like food deserts and accessibility, right? But the way Ali was using it wasn't in the left-wing way. It was a different way to try to paint vegan as elitist cosmopolitans who are naive and don't understand the real world, in more of a right way. So I go into that a bit in the video.
Yeah, but I'd say it's the left who does that more. Oh, you're a bunch of white privileged, like cosmopolitan elitists. You don't understand the struggle of the people in the suburbs of Chicago and blah, blah, blah.
No. So in the US, there's a pretty big urban versus rural divide, where urban is more liberal, progressive, people live in cities, and the rural is, people in suburbs or actual rural areas, and they think of themselves as a lot more connected to the land and not reliant on different systems, whereas the liberals are like, oh, you just go to Whole Foods and buy all your stuff. I think Joe Rogan mentioned that as well. So the urban-rural divide is very real and politically divided in the US specifically.
From my experiences, though, anytime I've been called...
I think that's an important point to make. He's just said, from my experience, and he's been saying that all the way through, whereas Natalie is using research that's been published and found out by her own group and everything. It's the difference between kind of knowing what you're talking about and having some evidence and fact checking, and just going on your emotions, which, it's just very kind of shallow. I was quite shocked, really, when because like Natalie wipes the floor with George just about all the way through this, because she's responding with facts and figures from research, or even corrections. No, well, that wasn't in the UK, that was in the US, and well, actually, that. So it's just really, really weird. Right, I've got about a minute to go.
Every time I've been called, for example, cis white male privilege the right just don't say that. It's just leftist anti-vegans who say that. Colonizer, you're telling indigenous people what to eat and all this kind of stuff. Which is not, I don't even know what the fucking left is anymore, because isn't the left meant to be anti-tradition? You say, we're the left, we're progressive, we're against your trad lifers and all this. Talk to a leftist about veganism, they turn into the biggest fucking trad lifer in the world. You're destroying indigenous customs and traditions.
Yeah, I think that we could talk shit about hypocritical left wingers all day. I think what they're doing there is more trying to protect the indigenous people, and obviously I don't agree with how they're doing that, and I don't even think they really care about the indigenous people. They're just trying to get out of their own behavior. But I'm not sure if it's based in tradition or concern for the oppressed.
Right. Okay. So, my take is that Natalie's position is much more nuanced than George's on just about every point that was raised, and so I think she kind of wiped the floor with him, really.
I think someone who is resistant to becoming vegan, whatever their other political views, will come up with some excuse, not to become vegan, and that's just what's happening, isn't it? People bringing up stuff about indigenous people, and that's just their own excuse.
Do you buy the line that there's hardly any right-wing arguments against veganism?
No, I think there's loads of right-wing. Well, in terms of the sort of things that that right-wing people support, there's stuff that's supposed to be like kind of traditional, like animal farming, for instance. I mean, certainly in terms of in terms of, you know, sort of like policies, like I said before, of the different you know, the different parties who these people are going to be liable to vote for. You can see that, can't you? You can see that the ones that are more like, you know, pro the animal farmers and pro, you know, the existing system and not changing, are likely to be more right wing, and the people that vote for those parties and support those parties are likely to be more right wing, aren't they? Yeah, that is the situation. But in terms
You
of
mean resistance to change in general, you mean?
yeah, but I think people have their. I think it's a much more individual thing in terms of, you know, the excuses people, you know, people give to not go vegan, and there's a myriad of those, isn't there? To be quite honest, and I think that you know, whether someone's left or whether someone's right, they're going to find and if they don't want to become vegan, they're going to, or they certainly don't want to stop consuming animal products, they're going to find some, you know, they're going to find some excuse. They're going to come up with some, you know, some reason in their own head to try to justify, you know, not doing what you're suggesting they do. You know, so it's kind of not really, you know, I think everyone as an individual comes up with stuff. I don't know how sort of linked to politics it is. And the indigenous people, that's just another, you know, that's just another excuse, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a very strong point, and in fact, this is the kind of point that Steve Best would make, because he said in the Luxembourg speech, you know, I've been working within the left for 30 years, and it's a deeply speciesist place, you know, and he gives the example of kind of people on the left in kind of groups, you know, railing against this oppression and all that, and then kind of let's have another bucket of chicken wings. That's the example.
The problem with the left isn't that the left is left; it's not left enough. The left hasn't included within its ambit of opposition to oppression and exploitation, hasn't included our fellow animals within that. It's just the left needs to move further to the left to encompass that. That's the problem. The left isn't left enough. In general, that's the difficulty.
They've left a few things out.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because what we're talking about, and this is a very different thing, and this is how I would talk to people, you know, with left-wing views, you know, particularly people that are campaigners, and it's to do with imperialism. You know, left is supposed to be opposed to imperialism. But what is the greatest form of imperialism on our planet? It's the imperialism imposed by the human species on our fellow animals. You know, what I refer to as the human Reich, which actually means the human empire. Reich means empire. That horrendous imperialist, expansionist oppression, all these words that the left use to, you know, talk about the various forms of human oppression they oppose. It's, you know, all of that is kind of dwarfed, really. Not that isn't important and shouldn't be opposed, human on human oppression, but in terms of the suffering, slaughter, the magnitude of it, you know, the oppression of fellow animals by humans, human imperialism is by far worldwide, isn't it? You know, you get leftists opposed to occupations, you know, opposed to the occupation of Palestine by Israel, north of Ireland by the British, you know, parts of Ukraine by Russia as well, you know, all over the world. But the greatest occupation is the occupation of this planet by the human species. And I say occupation really quite deliberately, because we're occupiers, we're not inhabitors. You know, to inhabit, I would say, is to live in harmony with the other animals that share this planet with us. But humans, the human species doesn't do that. We're occupiers. You know, we're tyrants, we're exploiters and oppressors of the other sentient life forms that live here. And that's how I talk to someone on the left, saying you're against oppression, you're against occupation, you're against exploitation, but you're not against the greatest form of all those things, by light years that exists on our planet. You know, that's how I'd speak to left wing. What we're dealing with is imperialism. That's the problem. That's what the left is supposed to be about, against.
I bet that goes down well, Ronnie. Any final thoughts, Andy? You muted, mate. Still muted.
I don't know how I'm muted. But yeah,
Oh, you're not now, yeah.
I think it's important too, as well as that, to say no evidence has been produced here throughout that. All of that was just George's opinion, and I could very easily take that information that he's just presented and flip it back on him. Him saying, all these arguments are from the left or against the left, and whenever I speak to a right-wing person, all they bring up is soy boy. Okay, well, I can interpret that data in a completely different way. What you're telling me is every time you have a conversation with someone on the left, they're willing to have a conversation with you, even if they maintain excuses. Whereas every time you have a conversation with someone on the right, they're not able to have a conversation with you. All they're able to do is insult you. Thanks, George. You've just proven our point, not yours. All you're saying is that the people on the right, for the most part, aren't able to engage in this conversation. It's above them, both emotionally and intellectually.
I think that's a really strong point, that at least people, because they're interested in justice issues on the left, they've probably thought about animal rights, however, whereas people on the right are much more likely just to have dismissed it, so they don't have to come up with, they don't even, it doesn't enter their thought process.
And that's
really
precisely how he described it, right? We take the information he gave us. He said all these arguments, they'll bring up about this or they'll bring up about that, whereas the right, and twice he said it and twice he used the same example, they'll just call you a soy boy. Well, the information, George, that you're telling us then is you're far better off and far more likely to have a productive conversation with someone from the left, even if they're confused about their position, because you've already dismissed the person on the right as not even able to have a conversation. And you know what?
This is what we've always said. Again, going back to Steve Best, is a chance that everyone is speciesist. But if we're looking for people who share our values in a general sense, then we're looking at people who are left-leaning, and doesn't even need to be left-wing, left-leaning. And it's always been the case, which is why we've always gravitated towards the left, and why the left have always gravitated towards the movement, because it's the general area of where they're at, essentially.
It's kind of, to me, it's to do with supremacism, right? You know, in some ways, the greatest evil in the world, well, perhaps in every way, the greatest evil in the world is supremacism. In other words, where one group of beings thinks they're superior to another group, and this is often used in the context of humans. Supremacism of one group, like white supremacism, for instance, male supremacism, and human supremacism over our fellow animals is another example of that, of supremacism. And supremacism is the fundamental problem on Earth, I think. That's the cause of all the oppression. But human supremacism, I think, in terms of the numbers of its victims, is you could say is the worst in that sense.
Yeah, if you're just counting, as it were.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, blimey, we're coming up to 2 hours and 3/4. So.
Well, I think if people stayed for an hour and a half, they'll probably stay for the whole lot. I suppose that's why it was probably worth.
Yeah, there's probably loads of people on camp beds and stuff, and.
The good thing about these ones, though, is they don't rely on viewing the screen. So if you wanted to listen to this as like a podcast while you were driving, that's easy enough, because there's nothing for them to look at.
That's right. Yeah. And it's not worth looking at us three, is it?
Not really, no.
And obviously, I think most people wouldn't have been able to read the transcript. So, yeah, it's probably just an audio one.
Right. So, are we saying we're finished?
Yeah, I think we've exhausted the topic, and we've exhausted ourselves.
Exhausted ourselves, yeah. Okay. Well, obviously, Thank you. Oh, yeah. I want to say I made a terrible mistake. Did have my notes. There was a lot of ableist language in that audio that we've just heard. I wanted to point that out, because there was a heck of a lot of it. And so I do apologize that I forgot to do that. And I know that apologizing at the end of the show is useless in that sense, but I do acknowledge it. And I do have the note. I can even hold it up to the camera if you want. So I want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I mean, that's amazing that people have stayed for so long. And
will they ever recover though? That's the thing.
Including ourselves, I suppose. Right. So goodbye, everyone. I suppose is what we should say, is it? We might as well play this silly opening again because we'll probably never use it again. So, cheers, everyone.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.